as well as being held live. This is a working group. We have actually handled it that way throughout the course of our 5 meetings. It has worked very well. So we will not operate under our rules of order. We will operate as a working group. Things will still follow through the chair. We would ask that everybody please adhere to one speaker at one time, limit side conversations. If people get out of hand with that, I will take charge of that issue. I don't think we'll have that issue because we've not seen it in our previous meetings. We will have time for public comment after our recommendations phase. And we will limit that to 3 minutes. Once again, as we've done in the past, ask that people confine their comments to 3 minutes. That's all of the procedural details that I have. The first thing that I have got would be the approval of our agenda. Everybody should have gotten that. Any amendments to our agenda? If not, I would entertain a motion to approve our agenda.
I make the motion to approve the agenda for the day.
Motion from Commissioner Conley.
A second.
A second from Mr. Aramosby. Any discussion? All right, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Second order of business, we did not have the minutes of meeting 3 prior to meeting number 4, so we did not approve those minutes. In going through those, I did notice that there were a couple of names that were spelled incorrectly, so I would like to amend those names. On page 3, under the public comments, the name Bill Ames should be spelled A-M-E-S rather than A-I-M-S. And on the following page, Mark Pot at the end of the third bullet point from the bottom should be spelled K-O-T. His last name is Mark Pot, K-O-T. So I had those amendments to meeting number 3's minutes. Any other amendments to those minutes?
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't Mr. Koff retired from county planning?
Yes, he is.
So he's gonna be the community was or who's retired from the county planning? Not work state county planning. On page 4.
I would say previously worked.
Yeah, well, I'm amenable with whatever.
Okay, I think we should probably amend it to previously worked in county planning. Other amendments to our minutes. All right, I would entertain a motion to approve them as amended.
So I make a motion to approve the minutes of meeting number 3 with the amendments to.
And we have a motion by Commissioner Conley. I believe we have a second from Mr. N. Any discussion? All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, we have that. Now, we also received our minutes from meeting number 4. I did not see anything that I felt needed to be amended. Did anyone else see anything on meeting number 4's minutes? If not, I would entertain a motion to approve the minutes of meeting number 4.
Make a motion.
Motion was that from Mr. Hen? Oh, from Mr. Aramos.
All second.
Second from Commissioner Conley. Any discussion? All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, we've got our meeting minutes approved. We are on to today's function. Just briefly to talk about meeting number 4. In meeting number 4, our goals were to review questions from the working group, which we did, and to discuss recommendations through the consensus process. I think we had a really good session at our last meeting. We were able to get through all those recommendations which had been submitted. And it was determined at that point in time, we would have Sara go through and try and compile those recommendations, which were very similar, and bring forth a new set of recommendations for us for this meeting. We've got those. So our focus today is going to be to continue discussion on recommendations through the consensus process and to prepare recommendations for the final report to Governor Gore. So, once again, in, looking at our recommendations, I think those recommendations that we received last week from Sara looked very good. I was very pleased with the way things were put together. I'd like to thank those working group members who helped her. I think there were some editing and some other work that was done by the working group members. So thank you very much for everybody who participated with that. We all know we did work, we did that. So we really appreciate that having been done. As we get ready to work into our recommendations for today, I think first thing I would like to do is see if there are any comments from our working group. Before we do that, I guess not first thing, Sara had said that she would like to make some comments and then we'll get into some comments from the working group members.
Thank you, Chairman, local working group members and members of the public. I'm Sara DiRienzo. Most everyone knows me, but I'm the governor's deputy policy director, and I've been charged with helping Commissioner Slaughter, our chairman, lead this local working group effort. And so I just want to take some time to thank you all for your commitment to this process. All of you in the room, we started this with your application, I think in December, and it's almost June. So that's a tremendous amount of time and effort and energy that you've spent on these animals. And that's remarkable. You guys are all volunteers. You've been spending the amount of time, you probably have an associate's degree in crop farm now. And that's amazing that we have people in Wyoming who are willing to volunteer and step up to be a part of these processes that have such a tremendous impact on the future. You know, I've been updating the governor along the way, our process over the last 6 months, 5 meetings, lots of conversation. And he just wants to thank you so much as well for all your dedication. It's been commendable. The conversations that we've had in this room, the respectful dialogue and listening to every single one of your perspectives have made this process easy. Because you've been invested, you've taken the time, and you've really dug into the science and listened to each other as we form these recommendations. So the governor's very pleased with the work that you've done to this point. And he's just this process has just been amazing. So he's looking forward to seeing our final product that I hope we get through today. And I just also want to thank the public. Lots of folks have been here from the start, every single meeting, seen some of you at. Thank you for coming. Thank you for your support. Thank you for providing this local working group with your public comments and your perspectives, both in the room and those who've been online. It's been really valuable to have that input as we form these recommendations as well. The community's support of this process has been commendable as well. So thank you very much. At the end of the meeting, we'll talk about what's going to happen next. But I'll give you a little rundown. So when we finish today, what I'm hoping for is that we have, our recommendations are very solid. We might need to make a few changes after, and then we can do that over email if there's any last things, and you'll approve the final recommendation. Give me your final approval, and then I will put those into a report that documents all the different meetings, includes our minutes and our progress to this point, and you'll also have a chance to take a look at that before we deliver it to the governor, and then it will be in his hands to review your work, the recommendations, and make a decision about designation. What's the timeline on that? I'm not sure, but I'll be pushing to move that forward quickly as we can to get those recommendations in. But thank you very much for all your work. Thank you to Game and Fish for being here every single time and helping with all of these meetings. Your information has been amazing to help move along this process. And also all of our presenters that aren't here, that are non-game and fish, BLM, Forest Service, oil and gas, the state lands. We've had so many wonderful presenters. So this is all necessary to make this all work and have the information that brought us to today. So I just want to really let you know how grateful me and the governor are for all your work. So thank you.
Thanks, Sarah. She stole my thunder for the end of the meeting, so there will be some redundancy at the end of the meeting when I make my thank yous for what has been done. Thank you very much for that. So now what I would like to do is work into our recommendations. As you remember at our last meeting, we went through the consensus voting process. We have come up with what we believe is a good representation of the comments that were made and the recommendations which were made at that meeting. Obviously, if you feel like the comments relate to something which you had referred to at our last meeting and these misrepresent that or don't represent it in the way you would like, that's the purpose of this meeting, is to finalize it and get it into a final form. So as we're working through it, please, once again, feel free to, comment on the recommendations themselves. We will once again vote on the recommendations as we get through. We'll go through this entire draft, have comments, and hopefully come to a recommendation for the governor at the end of this meeting that we can all be proud of, and that will be what he's looking for to aid him in moving forward, potentially with the corridor, regardless of whether there's designation or not. So before we do that, I just wanted to open it up to the members of the working group to see if there are any comments. I'll do this again at the end of the meeting if there's anything else, but before we get to those recommendations, any comments that the working group members would like to make? I'll start with Commissioner Newton. Is there anything that you'd like to? We'll just go right underneath if there's anything.
No, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a way to get into the recommendations.
Okay, so thank you. All right.
Same.
Okay.
Same here.
All right. Feel pretty good. Just one more time.
Lynn Bernard, Sublette County Commissioner.
Go ahead, Lynn.
Oh, I'm sorry, I apologize.
No, I stepped on your toes there. If you've got something that you wanted to bring forth, I misunderstood. I thought you said you were okay with 40%.
No, I asked if it was okay to bring it up. We had discussed prior to the meeting.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Lynn Bernard, Sublette County Commissioner. I truly appreciate the time and effort that we spent on the migration corridor and learning a bunch from all of the professionals. As I stated in the third meeting, I'm one commissioner of a 5-commission board in Sublette County. I've taken the recommendations draft back to the Board of Commissioners of Sublette County, and we've discussed in depth what is transpiring. And the Sublette County Board of Commissioners have asked me to relay their thank you for taking this on, and they truly appreciate everything. However, when it comes to Sublette County, that we will determine what direction we want to go and how we will apply rules and regulations on our homes without having any mandates being applied to us. And I want to bring that up at the front so people move to the position of the county. They're thankful, but we'll control our own county. Thank you.
All right. I don't have anything until we get into our draft. Mr. Root, same.
I'm good.
Okay.
Give me the grant all comments.
Jasmine?
I want to say thank you. I've enjoyed the whole process and really enjoyed getting to meet you all. It's been just a really in-depth conversation, an interesting group of folks, and I think there's a lot of representation across. So I've enjoyed meeting you all, no matter the outcome.
This is great.
I'll wait till we get into things.
Okay.
And I'll have some comments.
All right, sounds good. Well, with that, let's go ahead and get started. We'll start with section 1, which are recommendations related to additional opportunities for conservation, including voluntary opportunities on private land. The first article will be to support fencing improvements and removal. So basically, the Sublette Antelope Local Working Group supports improvements and removal of fencing to better antelope migration. Fencing is a threat identified throughout the corridor in all 8 segments and 8 of the 12 bottlenecks. Therefore, the local working group recommends, first recommendation, to continue to modify fences to be wildlife friendly, to remove unneeded fences and utilize seasonal fence laydowns throughout the corridor, including working with landowners on voluntary efforts. The local working group supports virtual fencing where appropriate. So once again, in keeping with our decision process, I would ask that we once again have a vote on this recommendation. And if there are any comments on any of the other accompanying language, please feel free to make comments on that. Mike.
Mr. Chair, I've got a word insertion that what the group thought of after the word utilize in the second line and coordinated. I think it backs up below where we talk about coordinated between public and private groups. I think it just reads or it stays consistent.
Anybody else have any comments on that, or how do you feel about that? Does the language change looks appropriate?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
if I could just make I guess, an overarching statement. So these recommendations look a lot different than the listing that we put together before. And so, as you probably read through, there's a little bit of an introduction with those policy statements that we talked about. And so, some of those are longer than others, depending on the types of conversation that we've had in the working group. So, love for when we work through these, to take a look at those sort of policy statements and positions too, alongside the recommendations. But, you know, the recommendations are solidly noted with the therefore recommends. And I just want to address Commissioner Bernard and Sublette County Commissioners. These are all recommendations. And so I hope the county can, you know, select recommendations that work best for them or expand upon the ones that do work and move forward with those. But for Sublette County and all the counties, you know, these are recommendations, and I think we should keep that in mind. If it seems too directive or too forceful, that's something we should talk about today. So, thank you.
Thank you, sir. All right. Any other comments with respect to this recommendation? So at this time, I would ask that we once again vote whether we have recommendation, whether we have a recommendation with reservation, whether we have a recommendation with serious reservations, or whether we would just be against this as it's written. So once again, I would ask for a vote on this. All those that would be in favor of this recommendation with no reservations.
Great, thank you.
Okay, was that everyone?
Mark it down, good start.
All right. The second recommendation, which we have in the section, is to pursue opportunities for continued fence conversions and removal through federal, state, and private funds. Find opportunities for incentivizing conversions. Any comments on that? Okay, once again, if we would vote either 1, 2, 3, or 4 on that. Okay, so that we are still off to a good start. Okay, Sarah. Yep. Okay. Third recommendation under this section would be to continue support for coordination between public and private groups to prioritize fence conversion and seasonal laydowns in the areas of greatest need in the corridor, particularly in bottlenecks. Comments, questions?
Mr. Chair, do we want to just match the above with coordinated seasonal again? Fence conversions and coordinated seasonal laydowns? Underline the first suggestion.
I believe that that would be appropriate if we're going to make that change in the first section. So add coordinated. Other comments? All right, vote on this one. Once again, it looks like we're unanimous. The next recommendation in this section would be to encourage agreements regarding responsibilities for laying down and putting up fences, especially on private property. Comments?
Mr. Chair, this has come up in the last couple of years in Sublette County on federal property where they're loose agreements and then they don't follow through with getting them stood up. In fact, just last weekend, there was about a mile and a half of fence that a rancher I was working for had to put it up because the NGO failed to do so prior to turnout. So I would get rid, my comment to this section is it should be unilateral and I would end it at fences. Cause I think it shouldn't be just specific to private property.
Was this maybe trying to add emphasis to private property?
Yeah, and I wouldn't say that it was particularly for private property. I think it's just noting a special need on private property.
Yeah, I think
I see
my point to that is on private ground, they have total control of that. And on the public land, he was shutting gates and then ended up what was an hour job turned into a 4-hour job. And he has no responsibility. No, it's his section of fence, but the agreement was not with him. It was with BLM. So that's why I just think highlighting private property, you should highlight everything now. Because if we're gonna do it, it needs to be coordinated and somewhat binding, or else it's not gonna last through the changeover of. I mean, we lost a wildlife biologist in the Pinedale field office that was avid for this and with vine groups. And now there's no other wildlife biologist that's what is as avid as he was. And so stuff's starting to slip through the cracks that he would just go do. So I think
People need
it's
that seasonal reminder.
Yeah, I mean, I think
not
it's-
fair.
great, but private property, they got the teeth and they can say, you didn't do it, then we're done. It's not it's gotta be, we're gonna do this, it's gotta be all parties engaged for the long haul.
I think we can certainly make the recommendation. I don't think we necessarily have to have the especially on private property. How's any other group members have heartburn with the leading, especially on private property?
I think with all of the fencing, there's a challenge of if everybody's responsible, nobody's responsible. So, and I don't know how you get around it with all the different landowners.
Yeah, and once again, I think what we're trying to do is just once again state that we would encourage that because I think there is a benefit to that. Yeah. Mike.
I think Mike's point is on target. I'd doctor suggested that things they could do is encourage the development of templates and agreements that clearly allocate responsibility. Oh, sorry, yes. I had suggested that the state could encourage, and for that matter, any interest could is develop template agreements that clearly allocate responsibility. So you at least have a written documentation as to who is supposed to do what. Folks who have the ability to enforce that are the private landowners who say, do this should come on my ground for the agencies. I think that would be helpful. So folks don't try to reinvent the wheel or forget stuff. I don't know that hasn't been really. But I would hope that that's something that would encourage be taken up. So folks have a checklist. Some people are better at writing contracts than others. And having clear responsibility is the best thing we can do to guard against. Somebody just not showing up to work. Then they may still not, but at least, they're supposed to do it, point it out. So.
Yeah, I think that's a point well taken. I'm not sure that it's something.
I don't think I think that's too detailed, but folks in the room, whether it's game and fish, NGOs that are here, landowners that are here. Shoot, there are agreements out there. Some are probably pretty well written. Blank out parties' names and so forth. Educational opportunity that they can try to smooth it. A small piece of the puzzle.
Other comments?
I would throw out there, if folks are interested in what Mr. Brennan is saying, we could say, develop template agreements and encourage the use of agreements to ensure the responsibilities for laying down and putting up fences are met. I mean, strike, especially on private property.
I think we may be getting in a little too deep if we do that.
Yeah, that's so let's put it out there.
Yeah, but other comments. I think there is basically a consensus that we can go ahead and strike, especially on private property, and then move forward with voting on this recommendation. So with, especially on private property stricken, please vote. on the steps.
Okay, you might be, and you're getting into some details that I wouldn't be aware of.
Yeah, I think,
Yeah.
excuse me, Mark, I believe. So Dave, did you have a further question on easements, or are you okay with?
I'm good with where we're going.
Okay, great. Mike,
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Newsom. If you could correct me, is that a special use lease? Or is it a conservation lease?
So you're asking about the specifics of the type of lease, the type of lease? I might look to my fellow Commissioner Carlman. Are you aware of the specifics of that type of lease?
My name is Larry Carlin, I'm Chief County Commissioner. Great work you're all doing for the Parks Service on this committee. It's $2.35 million. It's paid for out of a special purpose excise tax fund. The voters approved. They gave us $8 million. Conservation purposes of Chief County. This was something that they had in mind. I think when they voted. These, I have it. I brought my laptop. I didn't dig it up in the 10 seconds. I didn't think about it, but I think it's found as a conservation and recreation lease. And in addition to the features that Mark highlighted, there's also a big commitment. It's safe. Again, we asked to weed control. That parcel is pretty nasty in there. So the early effort is on weed management and some trail development. Those trails went along. I think it's a conservation and recreation lease on the trail. On that parkway.
thank you, Commissioner. All right,
I got a follow up to that. I guess my concern, Ag's concern with that is, I don't believe that OSLI has conservation leasing under a separate chapter of their rules. And specific to the stuff that Brandon was mentioning falls under a special use leasing. Game and Fish has quite a few of those around the state. And I think the word conservation leases on state lands in other states have led to quite a conflict with agriculture and agricultural leasing. And I'll cite specific issues in Idaho where NGO groups outbid grazing and then quit paying in a couple of years and removed infrastructure. And then the state could not lease it back because the agricultural entity said they removed all the infrastructure. Now I've got to invest a bunch of money back into it. So I think if it's under the special use lease chapters, there's a specific rules they follow and they can't have conflict with ag. They can layer on top, but they can't compete directly with a grazing lease. And 98% or more of state trust lands are currently under lease. And so they would, under the special use lease rules, it accommodates how that will interact. And I'm comfortable with that. I don't want to pursue a whole new set of rules around conservation.
let me head this off if I can, Mike, first. I think we're a little bit off topic in looking at this from a question on what conservation lease was. I think in looking at our recommendations and what our framework is, what we're doing here is nothing more than stating that conservation leases on state lands would still be an interest and something that the governor could potentially look at a later date. So I don't think that we're advocating that. I think it's something that we're once again just bringing forward in this recommendation.
And I appreciate that, Commissioner, but that takes me from a 3 or a 4 to a 2, if I can get those answers.
Okay.
That's why I'm trying to get the answer figured out.
Okay.
Just to,
I think I read some.
It is a special use lease.
Mike Brennan had his.
Throw it in there quickly.
I think I have it. I mean, I think there's a simple solution. Just say lost leasing, providing for conservation on state lands. That does not, it doesn't suggest that conservation leases are a specific type of lease that doesn't exist. And it would be broad enough to cover a special use permit for grazing or anything else that had a conservation element to it. If that wouldn't help, that's a 3-word change instead of breaking the.
Can you once again give me that 3-word change in context?
Discussion. Leasing provided for conservation on state lands.
Just a clarification, this is we're not actually in the recommendation yet. This is a documentation of our discussion from the last meeting. The recommendation that I would want us to look at if we're making changes would be this one. But yeah, glad to, but it, yeah, we got 2 things at play, I guess.
I'd stick that language there. Leasing providing for conservation on state lands, if like that addresses your concern.
If I may, Mr. Chair,
Is more.
it is hard to know how far down in the weeds we're going. In Teton County, preserving agricultural uses in our minds is preserving conservation. The 2 are the same. So it was kind of hand in hand that when that lease, the special use lease was created, it maintained the agriculture for that part, the agriculture use on that parcel. Now, in terms of the state, OSLI has rules to follow. I think that's what you're getting at. And if you want to make sure that those rules ensure that agriculture is something that is not precluded from a conservation lease, and I'm in complete agreement. So however we want to word it, I do think it's important that this is a very valid and useful tool to maintain the openness of the parcel rather than to see it fragmented in some way. Again, it was a glamping operation that was truly going to actually close off access, eliminate the ag use, close off ag access for hunting, and that concerned the folks in Teton County. And so we came up with this alternative.
Other comments? I think what I'd like to do is go to our recommendations. We'll get to this 3rd recommendation. We'll even talk about the language change there. Does that work for you, Mike?
Yeah.
So let's move to the recommendations then. The local working group first recommendation would be continue state funding to entities that support conservation easements and considerations of opportunities for dedicated funding for conservation easements. So once again, this is a separate issue from conservation leases. Any questions or comments with respect to this recommendation? All right, if not, let's vote on that. I feel like we had 1 and 2.
Any comments? Joe?
Jasmine?
I think my concern with conservation easements is the recognition of them. We've seen that the state and BLM doesn't always recognize them with definition for mitigation. And so the dollars that get utilized for mitigation funds get tied to conservation easements. And I struggle with that. We've experienced that firsthand to the tune of several millions of dollars. And then it's not recognized later as a mitigation. So the PAPO fund is a good example of $27 million for monitoring and mitigation. And some of those dollars went in large volumes to conservation easements, which maybe holds and protects those lands, but then they weren't recognized later in efforts for wildlife exceptions or beyond as a direct mitigation.
We can keeping with our consensus voting, we'll move on with that as a recommendation, noting that there was 1 person who had reservations. Second recommendation would be to support the work of entities with proven track records of success in conservation easements. But such as the Wyoming Game and Fish, Wyoming Natural Resources Trust Fund, and land trusts throughout Wyoming. Questions or comments, Mike?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, the Natural Resource Trust Fund does not hold easements, they fund them, so I think I would strike that out of there as they're not a land trust. Just that formality of they fund them, but they don't.
Comments?
I don't think this says these are holders of easements, just entities that participate one way or another in easements, and if the trust fund is funded them, they're certainly participating. So I wouldn't read this as implying that they own the easement. Land trusts obviously do.
And Game and Fish does, so that's why I took it as.
Game and Fish does, but Game and Fish can also provide advice as to try to structure an easement or whether an easement's worthwhile. I think keeping the trust fund in front and center is important. And I just don't see that.
Yeah, I don't see the connection there either. To it.
I mean, if the group feels that way, I just read it as Game and Fish holds them. The next in the series is a funder, and then Land Trust was the closeout. So I just took it as a list or a series of land trusts or people that hold these ones. So I'm comfortable leaving it.
Do you want to clarify, do you want to change sort of, track records of success in and add another verb there, like fun developing?
I wasn't good at English, so as long as everybody.
Good one.
I don't think it needs to. My reading of it would not be the way Mike is stating it. Would agree with enough. Mike read it all my comment. All right, thank you very much. All right.
They're successful.
You want us to add a definition section for proven?
No,
No,
I think,
very good comments.
Should we add that Mr. DiRienzo is going to verify that they have proven?
I think that leaves the determination of who is one of them.
Yeah.
Up to the state. But I would anticipate that's something that the state would worry about when we get to doing it. But
Yeah.
we're not trying to define it. That would be pretty tough. I get what you're saying.
Yeah,
That's an implementation thing as opposed to regulation.
I mean, kind of, to me, the only proven track is that they successfully acquired the funding and created the easement. Yeah,
I could suggest a whole list of criteria if I were trying to find the one to play with.
yeah, and I think that's where we're coming from, and some of what we saw was guardrails, or a need for guardrails on conservation easements.
Mr. Chairman, I got carried away. Colloquy, didn't mean to, but I get what you're saying. I think it's buyer beware when it comes to developing easements. And this is saying work with folks that have proven track records, and it's up to whatever's got something at stake to figure out what that is. It's not dictating who you do business with. I understand totally where you're headed, but I'm also using the funds for easement acquisition. It's a legitimate concern, but I think it's one that needs to be addressed at the time somebody's considering getting into it.
I think we're identifying it as an implementation tool that has been and can be very effective to what we're trying to do. So,
Mr. Chairman, I struggle with the proven word because about half of this stuff that goes on, the companies have never done it before. It was literally as fast as companies change hands. How are you going to establish any proven track record? You're not. I mean, besides that, an NGO falls in the same category. How do you know they got a proven track record? I struggle with the proven.
Yeah, I agree. So you gotta be careful who you're dealing with, regardless of their organizational level. If there's language that makes folks comfortable in saying, support the work of entities engaging in conservation easements, you can go that way, but I don't think that really helps you. This just says, look for people that have whatever the participants consider to be a track record. And then you decide whether you participate in it or not.
Mr. Chairman.
Ms. Lynn.
I propose that we substitute that list on state approved vendors. And that puts the ability back on the state.
I appreciate what you said, Mike. I think you help me, sort of look at it a little bit differently, but, yeah. Commissioner Bernard, I think that what we see come from, building these funds is a, state built. It's, a conglomeration, and the way that they get funding are from private entities plus, proponents, businesses, industry, mitigation dollars. It's like a massive group to get to the millions of dollars that they put towards the fund to win. So that would be hard to state.
Thank you.
I think we've identified that there are potentially issues with this, but I think we can probably go ahead and vote, see where we are, and then move forward in that point in time. So let's go ahead and vote on this.
You know, we talked about that a little bit last time in reflecting that conversation. I think there is what I'm hearing is there may be a desire to continue to talk about it, but there would have to be a state law change in order to make that happen. And so can't direct the legislature, though sometimes we may try. But, I think the intent here is to forward the idea that there is interest in conservation leases, and folks should be aware of that.
And once again, that's the way I look at it, is it's just simply that, a recommendation. It's something that we would like to potentially look at in the future. Yes.
Send it. With them, like totally rescinded it. They didn't put out replacement language. And I know that's different than state lands, but I think we want to be careful with our messaging on conservation leases. And it's to Mike's concern with ag, oil and gas and energy have the same concerns in that you don't want to encourage land leasing that prohibits other entities on the surface.
Mark.
I recognize the chair's, high level view, which is continued conversations is kind of the emphasis. If it helped folks. Again, this was a special use permit. We could make it, really put the side words around it. Because I think I had identified that there's at least one, if not two or three state land parcels that interact with the corridors, and so that's where I thought every little bit helps. And so special use permits that accommodate conservation leases that accommodate conservation, special use permits that accommodate conservation on state lands puts the sideboards around it that we are not talking about federal lands, we're not talking about some federal change in policy that impacts the corridors specific to those few state parcels that interact with the corridor.
Yeah, I don't mind that.
Mike, does that satisfy your question? Go ahead.
Mr. Chair and Commissioner Newman, while we were discussing, I made some of those changes, which are similar to yours, just a touch different. So after regarding, so everybody can see it, if Sarah wants to, I put in regarding special use leases for maintaining open space. And the reason I put open space was my rendition of what you and your fellow commissioner talked about, and being adamant familiar with that state section myself, it was to maintain open space. Yeah. And so to not have it developed into a somewhat commercialized or a commercialized entity. For paying customers.
That is right. That's our priority is open space. We like open space.
And then it kind of goes to Jasmine's comment, right. In recent years, conservation leasing has been a very hot topic in the federal world, right? But and this is a generational thing. You're never gonna get the general public to understand state trust lands because they think they're public lands. And the reason I say that is I've worked for 2 state land agencies for 12 years, and it's something that nobody's ever gonna change. It's just that hard, but they don't understand the difference. So I think open space doesn't get that swap over to conservation.
Mike, Brad,
Just deleting the word conservation.
Oh, sorry. And then I had conservation leases deleted. Sorry, Sarah. Thank you.
comments on that change? I'm all for it.
No comments on that, but there is a problem between federal and state in this conversation. Because grazing leases get into it, movement of hunters, how you get into it. So they're definitely entertaining with business. And so I'm not sure I like where this is going.
Okay, other comments?
Yeah, I would just say there's there's also a desire to maintain multi-use of these lands. And I think that's, they were set up to generate income, the Wyoming State Trust Fund. So.
Back on that, Craig, like that's how the leasing laws are written, is for multi-use. All of them, like back to, what is it, 1914 or something.
I just looked up the language and it says the defined purpose of the Wyoming State Trust lands is to generate long-term sustainable revenue for public schools and other designated state institutions, while also protecting the land's value for future generations.
Maggie?
I mean, would it be just as simple as putting multi-use for open space in there? To like reinforce that idea?
I think when you're talking about conservation leases, once again, as Craig alluded to, the basic concept for the Office of State Lands is to generate funding for schools. But that's not to say that a conservation lease couldn't do that. Paying for that lease might be an alternative funding that would be higher than what it would be potentially for a grazing lease or something in the future. So I think it still meets the criteria under a conservation lease. I'm not sure that that's addressing this question. Mark?
One final statement. I don't want to go on it, but the recognition was absolutely that it needed to generate the revenue, and the revenue that it generated needed to be higher than the alternative use. It is a lease. The state lands office knows that they want to hold on to these parcels and they don't want to lose them. So in the future, it could be another use. If it's not, it's gonna have to continue generating that lease revenue that matches or exceeds the alternative. And so it's just as Mike said, we are truly trying to just lock down what open space we can, especially when it's in the wildland urban interface, when it is being used for agriculture, when it does see migration of elk, get a lot of popular use through hunting, and the alternative use that was proposed would have really precluded all of that. So that we needed revenue. Again, the voters painted outside the box and approved the revenue for it. And it seems like in Natrona County, they might have a similar state land parcel. It might not be in a migration corridor in particular, but it's valued by the public for its open space. And they want to find some way of preserving it as open space.
For me, the important message here, Osley has an obligation, legal obligation in the midst of generating income to protect, conserve, and maintain the lands for future generation. And that tends to get shoved off to the wayside. And keeping it front and center is not their primary mission, I would say. But keeping that concept front and center is important. And to me, that's the real value here. I think the language works. There's lots of different formulations, but to me, it's important to keep that note there. Game and Fish, I believe, has a lot of agreements with Osley to do conservation work on Osley lands. Certainly on the Game and Fish palette for presentations to the state legislature elsewhere. That's where I'm at about it. So I'd like to see us reflect that to the nature of state lands job.
Yeah, I think we've hashed this pretty well. So I think we can go ahead and vote, see what we come up with on it, and then make a determination from there. So let's go ahead and vote on this as it has been amended. So it would read regarding special use leases for maintaining open space on state lands. Looks as if we have got 4 twos.
3, 4, 5.
In keeping with our consensus voting, we will move that forward. Noting that there were some concerns on that recommendation. Okay, the next section, section 3, would be invest in habitat improvements and water infrastructure. The local working group supports conservation of high quality habitat for the health of antelope and migratory behavior. Habitat quality is a risk identified in all 8 of the corridor segments and all 12 bottlenecks. Cheatgrass is identified as a risk in 2 bottlenecks, and weed invasion is identified as a risk in 1 bottleneck. The local working group recognizes and values the strong relationship between agriculture and wildlife on public and private lands, and believes that the rangeland improvements that benefit both are important. So in the conversation that I had with Dave Langford yesterday, one of the things that we talked about was, I believe that this information on the bottlenecks and weed invasion came from table 26 of the biological risk assessment. But I believe that even though cheatgrass is only identified in 2 bottlenecks, it is identified in 7 of the 8 segments. And I thought it might be something that we might want to add, that cheatgrass is identified in 7 of 8 segments and as a risk in 2 bottlenecks, along with being a risk in 2 bottlenecks, and weed invasion is identified as a risk in 1 bottleneck. What your thoughts are with respect to that? But I felt like it's important. It is in each of the segments. So even though it's only noted in the table in 2 of those bottlenecks, I thought that would be something that we may want to consider.
Did you say 7 or 8?
7 of the 8 segments, I believe it's noted as a risk. Mike?
I agree with that, but I would suspect weed invasion is probably in there also. A cheatgrass infestation presumably be weed invasion. I don't know if you want to tweak that, because I don't think weed invasion is limited to one bottleneck either.
Yeah, and when I went back, I didn't identify the weed invasion. I was just looking at the map.
And I don't know.
Cheatgrass.
It's grouped together as we read in the chart.
Is it? Okay, so in the table, it identifies in a bottleneck, but otherwise they're identified together as risks. So it would be in 7 of the 8 also. Then.
So cheatgrass and weed invasion are identified as a risk in 7 of 8 segments.
Yes.
And cheatgrass and in one bottleneck. Is cheatgrass and weed invasion lumped together as a risk in the bottleneck?
It's a little different in bottlenecks. There's one that's just cheatgrass and one that's cheatgrass and weed. So maybe Game and Fish could elaborate
Yeah.
if there's
So
a difference there, if that's worth pointing out.
Yeah. There should be,
we're verifying right now.
Yeah, one of the bottlenecks says cheatgrass and weed invasion, one of the bottlenecks says cheatgrass invasion. I don't know, that might be an inadvertent difference, because I believe they should probably all consistently say cheatgrass and weed invasion. I think you probably split hairs.
If there's cheatgrass, there's probably other weeds.
Yeah, I was gonna say, the two of the bottlenecks have cheatgrass and weed invasion, and 7 of the 8 segments. And they can probably all be listed as cheatgrass and weed invasion. And it would be very.
Okay, other comments there? I think we can make that change. We'll move on. Multiple federal, state, local, and private opportunities exist to support rangeland and habitat improvements. Not every opportunity may be appropriate or available on each acre of land, but a better way to understand the opportunities that exist is needed. The local working group emphasized the need to continue to uphold private property rights, including access to mineral rights. The intent of corridor designation is not to limit or prevent private or public land development, but to support the development of approaches to resolving potential conflict that ensures the least impact to antelope migration, consistent with the process used by the Wyoming Game and Fish Department for working on a project-by-project basis to determine recommendations on avoidance and timing and other project details. The working group recognizes that unmanaged wild horse populations can negatively affect habitat quality and availability for antelope. Because of the impact of feral horses to pronghorn, the local working group adamantly encourages the state of Wyoming to hold BLM accountable to manage wild horse populations to appropriate management levels to support the habitat needs of wildlife within the corridor. Local working group believes that hunters and other conservation stakeholders should be more engaged in feral horse management due to the impact on antelope. Feral horses are present in one segment within the corridor and adjacent areas. I would question feral horses being present in one segment. I believe it's more than one segment in the southern end of the corridor. Is that
I
true?
believe they're permitted, but that doesn't mean the presence is limited.
Okay.
You're absolutely going to be more than one.
So my thought was feral horses are present in the southern end of the corridor. Feral horse presence and management is an ongoing threat. That's how I address that.
And say the last part again.
I said southern end of the corridor, comma, feral horse presence and management is an ongoing threat within the corridor and adjacent areas. Yes.
There's 2 more permitted statements, 2 permits and 2 statements. Just,
That's a correct. There's certain presence in the order, there's permitted too.
Okay. Mr. Chair. Yes. Sorry.
Yeah, I think we should either call them, well, we call them wild and then we call them feral in the same paragraph. I think we probably should. This is my vote, but it's up to the committee as a whole. I like the word feral over wild, just for, unless the group feels that they are wild. But I think we switched the two occurrences in this paragraph to feral for now.
I think that's a good point because feral is actually what's used in the biological process. Okay, so any comments or questions within the text of section 3 here, in addition to these?
Question.
Jasmine.
Mr. Chairman, why the call out for, hunters?
So last time, I think, our discussion talked about that hunters need to get more engaged in this, not because of them hunting, but because hunters need to, the idea was, hunters are, have a really vocal role to play here when it comes to the impacts to the wildlife and the resource that they like to hunt. And so that's where that came from, but obviously it's still up for discussion if we want to not call out that user group specifically.
Mr. Chairman, Jeff and I saw that too. We also discussed hunting as a control mechanism last week. Last session. Bearing in mind that we're stamping our foot on this statement, I was wondering about that also. Because I recall hunting. I agree with logic per se for understanding involved as an interester. But that might be the source of some of the confusion. It was for me.
Do you feel
Part of the reason I think that getting hunters more engaged was because the feral horses are also affecting the wildlife. And we know it is on the livestock side of it, there's a direct effect of the livestock, but it is also directing the resource that the wildlife rely on too. So we're trying to get the hunters involved in that so that they can weigh in their support to try to force, I guess, BLM and these agencies to do something. That's kind of where that came from. I think I'm going to put that in comment.
You said it much better than I did in my summary, so thank you.
All right. Any more comments or questions with respect to that? Personally, I think it's something that if we can make more information available or to get hunters involved and have them understand the impacts that the feral horse population is having on them, it certainly benefits. All right, let's move on then. The first recommendation under this section would be to promote and prioritize state funds for rangeland water resource development within the corridor to give antelope and other wildlife water and improve grazing management where appropriate. Consider water locations that can ameliorate conflicts for resources with feral horses. Yeah, May.
I have some questions for Game and Fish about this.
Yeah.
So I'm curious if this is sort of an unnecessary task that could potentially impact how antelope are using the corridor. They're already using it, they're already finding water places. Is this sort of an unnecessary add that could, potentially have negative side effects, areas of congregation? Is this something we would want to avoid, or do we just need some text in there that water development, should be consulted by Game and Fish? I'm just curious kind of what your guys' thoughts are on this.
Yeah, anytime you can put water on an arid landscape, could be a good thing, but you guys see any issues?
I think it's very site specific. I think blanket statements that all water developments are good is probably not accurate. it seems like an obvious thing, that you put more water out there, but there are times where you don't necessarily want to draw livestock use into an area that's not, it's just very site specific, very, it's based on the managers on the ground in those locations would need to be all at the table and discussing those pros and cons. So having them in there as, where appropriate, is probably okay in my mind, but it's just, there's places where it would be great and there's places where it wouldn't. So.
Other comments or questions? Oh, good, Jess.
So we've been watering as long as I've been here, so it was 20 years, right? At some point in time, especially during drought. Do you see in specifically where we've been, do you see any negative impact?
I think those instances up on the anticline that I'm familiar with have been positive.
Okay, yeah, but that's getting, that's like site specific and I don't know, and that could be just, we've been doing it so long, we don't even need to have the conversation anymore.
I think those are good ads for wildlife and landscape in those situations.
Thank you.
Okay, no, thank you. Mike.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I think and I mentioned this a little bit last time, but this is my recommendation or part of my recommendation based on history when BLM did develop wells solely for wildlife and they maintained the EAs and the maintenance was solely for a couple of them in the Jonah were solely for antelope and maintained by BLM for that purpose. So, and then that also that, along this corridor, you can count all the ag related wells and reservoirs that we built for livestock primarily, but have a wildlife that they stop at every time. So I think it's just giving a priority to helping fund repairs and additions to those existing, but also new ones where appropriate, because I agree with Jill wholeheartedly. You just don't plop water anywhere on the landscape. There's thought that goes into that both on private and public land because of the cost of it and then the effectiveness and the potential indirect impacts. So I think that is just some reasoning behind why I created this recommendation about it.
Thanks for that clarification, Mike. Maggie.
If that's the case, we might need to include some language about maintaining like existing structure into that. Because this reads to me like it's about developing new water resources. And if that's your goal, then it's like also giving funds to what's already been developed. Maybe we need to be a little more explicit with that.
Yeah, I mean, that would definitely, it was an oversight rather could be added.
Mike.
Mr. Chairman, Mike, if it just said range and water resource development and maintenance, and take care of it.
Yeah, I think that addresses that.
Yeah, they're gonna watch me spell maintenance. Words to spell. No. That was close.
Never noticed if you hadn't brought it to our attention.
You could have pulled a fat finger.
Yeah. All right, I think we've covered that pretty well then, so let's go and vote on this recommendation. Okay. Next recommendation under section 3 would be to support state funding efforts to aggressively treat invasive annual grasses and conifer removal, continue to utilize local prioritization systems and encourage their use. Comments? All right, let's vote on that. Very good. Next recommendation, continue support for cooperative habitat improvement projects, including voluntary opportunities on private land. Comments? Red vote on this. Next recommendation, charge a state entity or consortium with developing a clearinghouse, identifying funding opportunities and organizations particularly targeted at private landowners to improve awareness and access to resources. Continue technical assistance support through the Budget Department, Grants Management Office. Comments? All right, no comments. We'll vote on
Just adding state of Wyoming, because people might wonder whose budget department is that, so I just want to clarify.
Okay. All right, let's go ahead and vote. Next, consider identification of an approach for exemptions from corridor management prescriptions for easements across public and state domain when giving access to private property in the corridor. Questions or comments? Okay, let's vote on that. Continue encouraging project proponents to engage Wyoming Game and Fish Department early in their planning processes. It's simple. Let's vote.
You have a question, Marty?
I mean, that just seems a little vague to me. I don't know what we're talking about here.
Doctor.
I think.
Just once again, all we're doing is just advocating that anyone who's planning project has early contact with game and fish.
Okay. That's fine with me.
It maybe not need to be said, but I don't think it hurts to say that.
Okay.
Okay, vote on that. All right. Continue state efforts through all means available to hold BLM accountable for managing feral horses to appropriate management levels. Mike?
I just want to say we had a lively discussion about tilting at windmills. When this topic came up. And I agree with that, but I'm glad we're saying. I like we use the word adamant. I mean, we're gonna really make sure they know how we feel. So I'm glad we're saying that. I recognize the wisdom of experience. Who wants to really take this up as your issue? So, like I said, appreciate Commissioner Bernard's observation with me in particular on this one, but I think it's a good thing for us.
Other comments? Wayne?
Mr. Chair, to put a little more teeth in that, that only talks to AML in herd management areas, and we know that horses exist outside of herd management areas. So I would add either another recommendation or a long sentence of total removal of feral horses outside of active HMS.
I agree with that.
Yes. That's good.
See a lot of heads bobbing up and down.
Is that forest management areas?
Yeah.
Anyone have any issues with that amendment? Thank you. All right, let's go ahead and vote on that one. The last recommendation in that section, to support efforts to develop a research proposal to determine resource competition between antelope and feral horses within the corridor. Comments? All right, let's go ahead and vote on that. All right. Moving right along. All right, section 2. The recommendations related to corridor components, bottlenecks, high use stopover, medium use, low use, protection buffer on the line sequence, and future research monitoring. Section 1, the Wyoming Game and Fish Department should monitor the effectiveness of the corridor designation. The local working group supports continued monitoring and research within the Sublette Antelope migration corridor to further understand the impacts of designation and the strategies in the executive order for corridor conservation. The local working group concurs with the threats identified throughout the biological risk assessment, and there is a desire to understand impacts in the future. The local working group discussed at length the 300-meter buffer and the known infrastructure that exists therein. There is recognition that in some locations, the buffer extends over areas not used by antelope. The concern of the working group is that with this information not immediately available, it is not clear in early planning efforts where the best places for development may occur. The local working group recognizes that in times of hard winters, antelope may rely heavily on lands located outside of their normal migration patterns, as reflected in the corridor designation. In particular, the local working group recognizes that I-80 and the Union Pacific Railroad act as barriers to antelope movement. The local working group raised concerns about the need to continue to study and improve habitat connectivity in areas adjacent to the corridor, including the development of strategies to address the barriers to antelope movement posed by I-80 and the Union Pacific Railroad to ensure in hard winter times there is adequate habitat available. Comments on this section?
Yeah, I would just say that I brought it up in an earlier meeting, but in the low and medium use, I think the 300-meter buffer is unnecessary. It just takes, especially on the southern end, it adds in a lot of stuff that's already there, a lot of existing industry, especially as you get to the northern part of the known sodium lease area. And short of the solar farm and that one bottleneck, I don't think there's a lot of issues in that area. And I mean, I'm not proposing we change this, but I just want that noted that I do think it's unnecessary.
And we note that. So.
Yep, I can note that in this section.
Can I add just a little bit of color on what happened just recently? The third quarter Wyoming lease sale is out and we have comments due by next week, but one of the alternatives inside of that lease proposal recognize the mule deer migration corridor, and they put the BLM applied a buffer beyond the buffers that are happening within these scientific papers or what Wyoming is recognizing. So our 300-meter buffer on either side. The BLM in this lease sale looked at a 1 mile buffer for the lease. And so that's like a buffer on top of a buffer. Just so you know how the BLM views the work that's happening in the state. That seems to generally get missed with BLM recognizing fully what Wyoming is doing. And it's a really big area. And leases come in large squares, sections of land, along with rectangles. And so adding a mile buffer on a whole lease, you might have a migration corridor that comes through a tiny piece of it. And that just gives you a little bit of how we look at it.
And that's an area for analysis, right?
It is.
It's an area for analysis. So the buffer that she's talking about, and in mule deer are different than pronghorn, we know that. But it's the buffer that they use is for analysis of impacts to the big game. Yeah, so but it doesn't say you can't do it in there. That's the space they'll be analyzed.
Yeah, we just know from experience that generally turns into COAs when you get to that permitting process. So it does cause industry major concerns. And then it's a very wide area for analysis beyond, what maybe goes with the actual corridor.
All right, let's go ahead and move into the recommendations. The first recommendation would be the Wyoming Game and Fish Department develop and implement a post-designation monitoring strategy that ensures the accuracy of the strategies and continued functionality of the Sublette Antelope Migration Corridor. Comments? Right, seeing the comments, let's go ahead and vote. Second recommendation would be to utilize local Wyoming Game and Fish Department expertise to validate and correct disturbance layers. Go ahead and vote. Okay, next recommendation would be the Wyoming Game and Fish Department continue to identify significant barriers to migration and pursue a research program to identify strategies to improve habitat access, particularly with regard to hard winter range conditions. Answer the questions. Mike?
Mr. Chair, I think this is an important thing, that doesn't live with an individual. Because when that individual retires, like we had a woman here from the Green River, you know, that talked about the panel south of Farson and then the technician who's not here today, our IT girl. You know, where she put them up, but there was a period of time, and I believe John remembered that it didn't happen. And so I think this is important that it doesn't, particularly areas in hard winter conditions, doesn't live in one individual's memory, that it's somehow, and we don't have to change this, it's just a comment that, you know, maybe there's a way to put that in Game and Fish's coffers that is known to all in the particular region versus one warden or biologist.
Else? All right, let's go ahead and vote. All right. The last recommendation in this section, the outcomes of these efforts should be communicated to the governor, the Game and Fish Commission, and the public at large, and should be used in the 5-year review of the corridor as detailed in the executive order. Outcomes should be considered as guidance within the corridor. Further, the 5-year review cycle should continue beyond the first review. Questions or comments? Hey.
So do we need to state that's kind of impacting the executive order itself?
I don't think so.
Okay.
So, you know, this comes into sort of that implementation piece of the recommendations. And so not knowing exactly how that might work, but if it's talking about the executive order, then we'll cross-reference that. So I don't think we need to get that one.
All right, let's go ahead and vote on that. That's good. All right, section 2, uphold Wyoming's authority over wildlife management. The local working group acknowledges the impacts of layered provisions related to conservation, including federal plans and state plans related to migration corridors of other species and sage grouse conservation. The group emphasized that state plans and conservation efforts are necessary to avoid unnecessary federal plan prescriptions and to prevent additional stipulations from being applied through the federal plans. The group believes that potentially overlapping management provisions should be considered and monitored closely to prevent untoward impacts on both wildlife conservation and economic development activities. Comments on that text? Okay, going from that to the recommendations. First recommendation would be use all available avenues to ensure BLM resource management plans defer to game and fish data and management authority within the antelope migration corridor. Mike.
Mr. Chair, as much as that'd be the state taking over management of federal property, so I would strike and management authority. I would leave it to defer to their data. But we, correct me if I'm wrong, Game and Fish, but you don't have management authority over the corridor, like the land itself, or you don't want it.
Like maybe this is like, you know, the sage grouse RP and how the RP points back to the state. And I think that's maybe a good example of that. Then yeah, I like the language here, keep going, sorry. I'm thinking that is part of it, is getting the federal government to recognize the state.
Authority over the animal itself.
Yeah.
And okay, and that's what I was gonna comment to change was authority over the animal, not the corridor.
Mike, did you have something?
No, okay.
Yeah.
Just.
When you read this, commissioners are cooperating agencies on these RMPs, all of them. But the consistency review by the governor packs the most teeth. And so I'm wondering if that doesn't belong in there. They're trying to say in there to ensure BLM. I can put all the comments I want in on BLM. But when it comes down to the final decision, that consistency review packs the punch. When we go up against DC.
If you don't know what a consistency review is, that, you know, after, in an RMP process, the governor's consistency reviews ensures that there's no conflict with state law or state policies. And so that's where we can point out, if there is, you know, to Jasmine's point, you know, one thing that we really emphasize is the state of Wyoming manages our state wildlife. BLM manages BLM land. And so I think that's the, you know, the assertion that I want to tease out.
Right. I mean, I would just compare it to like the DEQ having primacy in Wyoming, the Game and Fish has primacy on wildlife. I do worry, especially with Jasmine's example she just gave about the BLM, you know, with all these overlapping areas between sage grouse and mule deer and antelope. And then if the BLM was to tag on those buffers on everything, I mean, it could have a huge area that is difficult to develop. But I mean, the one thing companies want when they're developing stuff is certainty, and interpretation of laws is not certainty. So.
Mike.
I think it'd be a good idea to include the reference to consistency review. The governor's office, including governor's office consistency review or something like that. I don't think the governor's gonna forget about it, but we can try.
I agree. I think it's important.
Adding that, I've been trying to figure out, because you're saying use all the federal avenues, and that's an avenue, but I think we need to include the governor's consistency review, including and encouraging him to manage that way. Because that's all it is. Sure, we can't tell them to do, but that is such a key piece of this federal management.
How's that look in?
Yeah.
Mark.
It may not matter. Is refer a better word than defer? Refer to Game and Fish Data and Management Authority. We want to make sure that we're still, you know, again, Game and Fish manages the wildlife. And we want to make sure that we're emphasizing that.
Next question, I think defer because we want them to use their data and use it appropriately. We don't want them to reference it and add their own interpretation on top.
Thank you, Jen.
I agree, defer. That's more strength.
Other comments, Mike.
Mr. Chair, I think I don't want to add anything to this because we're already 4 lines into it. But I do believe in my comments, I had basically regurgitating this associated with the Forest Service and their forest plan, because there's a segment that goes through National Forest Service lands that I think is important to also basically mimic this. But I would maybe make it its own recommendation, because it's different. It's not an RMP and we can get into a little bit different verbiage, but I think it's an additional recommendation. After we vote on this one.
Sure. All right, let's go ahead and vote on this one. Next. Recommendation would be continue emphasis to project proponents to engage Wyoming Game and Fish Department early in their planning process. I think we already had another recommendation.
Yeah,
I
so
haven't said the same thing.
we discussed it both places, so I wanted to give the option. Do you wanna, in just one of the sections, or do you wanna emphasize it in both? I don't think it hurts, or, but it's up to the board.
I don't think redundancy is bad in this situation, having it in both places, I think is fine. It doesn't give me heartburn to have it in both places. Any comments? All right, we'll vote on whether we want to leave it or not.
Okay. Do you want to go back to,
Yeah.
recommendation?
Would you like to?
I absolutely agree that we should have enforcement.
Yeah, Sarah, I think if you just copy and paste that one above.
Then we implement
And then insert
the revision plan.
to ensure the US Forest Service.
Vision plan.
Yeah. US Forest Service. Forest planning process, because right now it's a revision, but.
Right.
And then defers. And then defer to, if. And then, yep.
Everybody good with that? Let's go ahead and vote on that. All right. On to section 3, recommendations for consideration of socioeconomic impacts to county and state revenues, jobs, and proposed and current projects. So that section 1 would be foster collaboration on projects and planning related to the Sublette Antelope migration. The local working group supports collaborative conversations to encourage the coordination related to development planning within the Sublette Antelope migration. Consideration should be given to the long upheld Wyoming value that multiple uses should be sustained, from economic development to trails to housing. Thoughtful planning underscores these values. Residential development is identified as a risk in 4 corridor segments and 2 bottlenecks, with motorized and non-motorized recreation identified in 1 segment. I don't know if we want to put in or on there.
I think it's a typo.
2 bottlenecks, so we want to change that. So, all right, with respect to that text, any comments or questions there? Right, moving on to, oh, go ahead, Ray.
Consideration should just be singular, consideration singular should be given. All right.
You got it. Parallel, parallel sentences.
All right, so the first recommendation would then be to encourage the counties on which the corridor is located to convene a group of relevant county entities, including but not limited to county planners, conservation districts, and other land use planners, to explore feasibility of and interest in voluntarily amending county land use plans to align with the executive order. Comments?
So counties have land use plans, but conservation districts also have land use plans. So I don't know if it's amending county entities' land use plans or county and conservation district land use plans. Because they both have them, they are different, they are.
You guys are counting.
We are a state, yeah, so I mean, I guess it would be better to spell it out.
This suggests county and conservation district county.
Yeah. So it'd be county and conservation district. land use plans.
I think, once again, one of the comments that came about in our conversation at the last meeting was alluded to the fact there was kind of a belief that counties typically have an idea what the other counties' land use plans are and how they're operating. And I think what we've kind of learned is that that's not necessarily the case. And that by having more coordination and more conversations, that could benefit each of the counties potentially with respect to this. So I think that was kind of the motivation behind this. I think it's a good move to help. My county planner seemed to think it would be something that would really help him potentially working with other counties. Just from my perspective. Other comments? Mike?
To touch on Mike's point, to say, to explore feasibility of and interest in voluntarily amending the land use plans. Sure, as that would capture the district's plans as well as anything.
Yeah, that's yours.
Okay, so do we have suggested changes for? We got some of those here. No, it's
No,
all,
mine was right where
Okay.
Mike made the simpler suggestion.
okay.
Amending the plans. Usually I try to have words.
All right, let's go ahead and vote on this one.
I think maybe interest to Collins of your.
Let's wait for a second. to
Okay,
vote.
all right, I got it now. I think.
All right. Okay. Second recommendation was to support development for counties to update. We got an extra two in there. Relevant county land use and federal land use plans with advice from council funded through FNRPA designed to make plans more consistent with corridor designation. First, I think we need to take one of the twos out. Support development for counties to update relevant county land use plans. Okay, I think we got that there. Mike?
I probably should say counties to update relevant county land use plan and provide and they're not, counties aren't updating federal land use plans. So provide input to.
Actually, we do have, the counties are, we do have a federal land use plan within the county.
Yeah, it's not your plan. Provide input to federal land. You don't have the power to.
Yes, we do through cooperating agency.
Mike?
Yeah, Mike, to help you out, so
Okay.
that we do as well, we call
Okay.
it Sublette County Conservation District Federal and State Land Use Plan.
Okay,
So
I
it's a
was,
policy.
sorry, I was thinking of a BLM R&D
Yeah.
kind of plan. So you stand corrected.
Yeah, I see where you're going.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
thanks.
May I just ask a little bit about wording? Why put development for counties in the very first line there, support development for counties rather than just support counties to update? I don't necessarily mind, I'm curious if there was this kind of a specific intent there.
I'm calling that friendly to the plan.
Mr. Chair.
Yes,
Go
Mike?
ahead, Chad.
Yeah.
Sorry, do you already get council funded for through the Commissioners Association? Right, like isn't a deputy attorney for,
So what will happen
is this different though, like, get,
it can be a little bit different. I think sometimes counties retain counsel to help them update those plans separate from the council that works at the county commission. And then counties are able to apply for and receive funds from the governor's federal natural resource planning account to assist in those efforts.
We're not limited by the WCCA, we have the right to apply for those counties.
Yes.
yeah, and then if you have a big thing going on, like the Rock Springs RMP, you can get more robust counsel added. Yeah, okay, thank you.
Mike in this one.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, just a well-rounded this for all entities. I would say support counties and conservation districts, because we as well can apply to FNRPA, and we have those plans as well. So I would add conservation districts there. and then delete county after relevant.
Okay, other questions or comments? Okay, let's go ahead and vote on this one. Okay, the next recommendation, encourage the Wyoming Game and Fish Department to maintain regular communication with affected county commissions to evaluate effects of designation on projects that have been completed and potential effects on proposed projects, and to encourage project development consistent with the EO. Emphasis should include potential effects on employment and county evaluation concerns. Updates should be shared with the governor's office. Comments on this? Mike?
I would also add conservation district boards and supervisors. Wyoming county commissions. You know, I already playing with the emphasis, but
Yeah, I'm sorry, Mark.
I think we all can assume we know what we're talking about, but do we want to specify to evaluate the effects on designation? Sorry, evaluate the effects of designation on projects within the corridor, or do we want to be even more particular in terms of then bottlenecks, stopover areas? You know, high, mid, low tiers. I just assumed that this was talking about the corridor. I just want to figure out there for discussion.
So you wanting to identify it as just a corridor?
Well, it's pretty clear.
Yeah, I don't think it needs to be more narrowly defined from the way I read it. So.
Yeah, that's what I initially read it.
Other comments?
Are we still, sorry, I didn't get a good feeling on if people are, good with adding conservation in this space?
Yes.
Yeah, I think that's fine.
You say.
board of supervisors or conservation district boards. Do I use too many words?
Okay. All right.
I think we've got.
Yes.
Just Mark, just trying to get a clarification on game fish came, the way you're asking us to do, you're asking us to evaluate 20 minutes. Of the county, that's concern we can evaluate.
I didn't hear his question.
Could you repeat it a little bit louder, Martin? I'm sorry.
So you're encouraging us to maintain communication with counties, and in this sentence, just kind of throws us off. It says emphasis should be potential effects on employment. Are you asking us to evaluate employment of the county agencies? I don't think you are, but it's kind of confusing.
Yeah, that's not our intent, but I see your conundrum there.
Is this specificity necessary? Because I think what I see as the intent in this is game and fish in counties, including conservation districts, should, work together when projects are underway, but then after projects are instilled on the landscape, it seems like there's a desire to understand what's changed with that project I don't know how game and fish could have a hand in any of these other employment or county evaluation.
Is that up to the project proponent? To really, that we need the economic impact?
Not necessarily the proponent, but as ongoing projects go, because this includes necessarily ongoing. But I don't think, as a county commissioner, we're the ones that looks at employment and can assess evaluation at the time, really knows what that is. and that they come in regularly now, encouraging them to stay coming in is what this should be about.
Yeah, I think in our original conversations, you know, it was to try and create dialogue. So that county commissioners had the ability to evaluate how those projects kind of affect potentially, but certainly the way this is worded. I think works with that.
Craig, could we just throw a comma after emphasis and put by county commissions, comma should include, so that takes the burden off game and fish and puts it on the county commissions.
They're good at that and everything. And the first thing yeah. I just took this as, and listen to what the county's concerns are regarding
That was the
employment
dialogue.
evaluation.
Does that apply to completed projects?
That's a good question. I think, first of all, we want to just make sure that we're not asking the game and fish to do something out of their lane. And so if we're putting in the first line, encourage the Wyoming Game and Fish Department to maintain regular communication with affected county commissions and conservation district boards, that's good. But it's to evaluate the effects of designation. Again, game and fish is all about wildlife. That's their responsibility. It's the responsibility of the county commissions working with the project proponents to evaluate the effects on the economy broadly, employment and otherwise. And I think you want to just separate the two.
But I would say yes to your question, Sarah, because take the solar fund in Sweetwater County. Those commissioners don't want to know the effects of what's been done in there, whether it's working or not. On this migration.
Specific to wildlife.
Yep.
And then separately, as far as the economic impacts, that's up to the project owner and the county commission.
So for the county commissioners and around, does the county commissioners need direction from the governor's office or encouragement to factor in potential effects? I mean, my sense is no. That's their prerogative.
Well, I think the dialogue, I don't know that.
Or is this meant to tell game and fish, listen to those concerns? Or
No, I think
I'm not sure.
from my perspective, the way I was taking it was that we would like the governor's office to be aware of what has taken place due to those projects that have been online. So it's creating a dialogue between the governor's office and maintaining that dialogue between the governor's office and commissions. That we just want to emphasize the fact that that is an important component in this is evaluation.
Should just simply be a break that out, and make it a separate bullet. I mean, first one's communication between good fish and local entities. And then encourage dialogue between the governor's office and boards regarding the effects of designation, including the potential effects on the evaluation, but that may.
Yeah, I think if we delete it from where you are there with emphasis should include the rest of that paragraph. And then inserted a new recommendation. And Mike, I'll let you, when we get to the end, maybe we can redo that. We'll move on to the next one, maybe.
The county commissioners present. Seems so big to me, it makes sense. So it's if the emphasis is making sure the governor's office and is listening to the county commissioners. How they feel about plans and conservation districts. It's separate bullet.
The part that is just, I think, I agree, I think there are too many ideas in this one bullet, so we need to break them up. The part that is just, I still don't understand completely is to evaluate effects of designation on projects that have been completed. It seems, how does, I mean, what effect does antelope migration have on completed projects, or what effect do completed projects have on migration?
I think completed needs out of there, it's just projects.
Because, yeah, I mean, the completion part is the part that's tripping me up, because if it's a completed project, the project is not affected by the broad part, I would imagine, like, I mean, but Pronghorn may be affected by a project. And that is a little bit similar to the recommendation that you have on post monitoring strategies.
Mark,
Very much agree that there is a little bit too much packed into this. I read that reference to projects as getting back to the executive order, but I would have to go back and reread the executive order to find the specific language. But the executive order is fairly clear that existing rights and existing uses are existing and are somewhat exempt from too much work, and contrast that with new projects and projects that have not yet been proposed, which need to more vigorously interact with the corridor, whether it's designated or not. More vigorously interact.
Mike, sorry, Mike.
And question, I think, for Jasmine and Craig. At times, we've talked about the interplay between the designation and further development activity within existing project areas. I kind of read this as and recognizing that the grandfathers existing developments and existing rights. Do you want to have somebody look to be sure that's what's going on? Because if you do, then it may not be any effect on developed projects. But if something happens we haven't anticipated, it might be useful to notice it and it's on the development. So that was where, Sarah, I saw the completed projects potentially fitting in is to guard or watch for unintended consequences.
Yes.
I read this to be if we had to move a project or if you weren't able to do it in time for that to be productive, right? So if you were having to observe STIPs or COAs or something of that nature, or we often don't have a collective of information of projects delayed, or if they didn't happen, or like if we're something bigger than even an oil and gas project, if they moved it out of state because it was easier than dealing with our wildlife regime. So that's one of the ways that I looked at this statement. Craig, what did you think?
Well, I was just to Mike's point, it probably is good to look at it somewhat because we in Sweetwater County specifically, we have the example of the solar farm, which had severe unintended consequences for the pronghorn. So, I wouldn't want it, and I don't think this does, but to get to the point where if there was consequences, okay, you got to move that building or whatever. But I think we should keep it in mind that this development happened. Now, did that do anything, or did it do exactly what we thought as we were going through the scoping and all the permitting?
So we can know if there are consequences.
Right.
Yeah, and I think it is two-sided. Like the consequences of the project going in, and then if a project couldn't go in. Right, so that's where maybe Sarah, the designation could have an effect. Or antelope could have an effect. And it's not so much the antelope having that, it's just the observation of protecting those lands.
But I would also say if in the previous ones where we talked about checking every 5 years and monitoring the corridor, that probably covers all this, the completed projects if the project goes in another.
Okay, so we've had lots of conversation. It seems that people think that this is a good concept. They don't like the way that it's actually written at this point in time. Shall we?
Was there agreement that we should delete this?
Well, we talked about deleting from emphasis on out and potentially doing a second. Potentially doing a second recommendation. but I'm not sure that we're at that point.
Okay.
So we'll see what Maggie's got to say and then we'll make a decision here in just a second.
Sorry, I was trying to make this, it's a very simple suggestion, but early on in this discussion on this recommendation. I think the way it's written right now, Game and Fish brought this up, it seems like the focus is on Game and Fish, but I think it should be on county commissioners, conservation district. So I think if we flop how that's written in the beginning there. So if it says encourage the, affected county commissioners and conservation districts to maintain regular communication with Wyoming Game and Fish and affected project proponents, then it's more clear about who it's asking to do all of this. And it's not, I think it makes it more clear that it's not asking Game and Fish to look at employment or county valuation concerns. But maybe it doesn't.
I'm reading.
I'd struggle with it from the point of a county commissioner, but half the time I don't know what the new developments are doing, because they're proprietary. So they're not walking in my door with an open door policy usually until they're ready to walk in the door. You know that.
Yeah, but we don't necessarily need a permit or some sort of something. So there's sometimes they're, out of the loop.
Okay, I would suggest that for now, let's just hold off on this. Go through the other recommendations and come back to this and see if we want to amend it. Or potentially delete this because it may be covered with some of the other recommendations which we've already done. Otherwise, we could be here talking about this one for who knows how long. So, everybody okay with that? All right, let's go on to the next. The next one will be maintain the ethos within policies and projects that the landscape within the corridor is enjoyed and sustained by multiple use communities. A little simpler than what the last one was. Any questions or comments? All right, Mark.
I just referring back to appendix C in the executive order. We do understand that there are multiple use that exists within the corridor, but the executive order is fairly clear that just to read it, wherever possible, development, infrastructure, and use should occur outside of designated corridors. Inside corridors, state regulatory agencies should support the continued functionality of the designated migration corridor. So I read this as, it would help me to include the notion that there are multiple uses within the context that the functionality of the corridor should be maintained. And again, there are a lot of different ways to do that. And, whether mitigating things, if you have an existing mineral right, you're going to use it, look at ways to mitigate, just throwing spaghetti at the wall. If you can develop water infrastructure to guide animals slightly around the infrastructure that's going to be used to extract the mineral or something like that, but the functionality of the corridor is important.
Could we add something like, and all user groups have a hand in sustaining connectivity or what functionality?
Mark, what would you suggest? And it was.
Maybe Craig, could you have us with this one?
No, I'm sorry, Craig.
I was just gonna say, I mean, even though it's not written in this, we already do that with Game and Fish when we're doing projects. I mean, we do mitigation, we do things to make it easier for the animal, and we do that already when we're doing a project.
I think this was Dave's recommendation, if I remember right, and you're the outdoor or motorized recreation representative, so I'm sure you were thinking about that from a motorized recreation perspective as well.
Well, it was pretty well covered the first part, when it came out, just acknowledging the fact on our section that we're looking at multiple uses should be sustained. For economic development to trail to housing, and that's covered at the first part of this thing. that we're talking about, that multiple use sustains our communities.
I mean, I'm pretty comfortable, I agree, multiple use is important. And I guess I would be comfortable kind of noting that maintain the ethos within policies and projects, that the functionality of the corridor can be sustained along with multiple use communities. Something like that.
That was kind of how I read it before, so.
Something like that, that helps. I certainly appreciate that.
Okay with that? That change? Any other comments on it? All right, let's go ahead and vote on this one. All right. And the last recommendation in this section, support the development and use of new technology that allows for development of oil, gas, and minerals to maintain revenue into the future while avoiding or reducing impacts to antelope migration. Comments? Mike?
Just a question. Is there a reason to limit it to oil, gas, and minerals? You got wind. You got potential solar. I mean. All of your constituents.
These people.
Yeah, no, I just thought. You might just say resource development. You probably wouldn't want just resource development, or you might not, but that would cover. I mean, it isn't just oil, gas.
How about Greg would suggest industrial development? Support development, use industrial or commercial or
Natural resource development would be where I'd go. That's my, that's what I think.
natural resources.
Unless this was driving at like our. So, some of the new technology or advancements, right? Like when I first started in my career, it took more than 20 days to drill a well. Today, we're around 10. Completions is that much faster. Our footprint is that much smaller, right? And the whole, piece driving that technology is, that's the idea, is the more well production you can get from one well versus multiple and the reduced footprint, that's all good for everything.
Yeah, I mean, I'm great with recognizing, I'm just saying,
Yeah,
wind farm planning and construction changes to minimizing footprints and so forth. So I didn't mean to exclude oil, gas, mineral focus. There's other resources being developed or potentially to be developed that this concept would apply to. So that just a question.
I think so too. I mean, I think, if you think about wind and they have to be that big.
Right.
They eventually have a design that,
They do.
doesn't, yeah,
They've got,
yeah,
they don't need this, I mean, they
Right.
have other issues, but
yeah, in any industry.
So if we were to change that and have it state, support the development and use of new technology that allows for industrial development that maintains revenue into the future while avoiding or reducing impacts to animal migration. Does that fit the bill? All right, let's go ahead and vote on that one. All right. Section 2, Wyoming Game and Fish Department should continue education and public information on the Sublette Antelope Migration Corridor. The local working group supports continued public education and information regarding the Sublette Antelope Migration Corridor. Working group values the wildlife resource and believes the collaborative efforts on education are imperative in order to pursue solutions to the identified risks. I'm okay with that. And the first recommendation under this section is to promote the Sublette Antelope Corridor through appropriate collaborations and public outreach and media methods. Increase focus on public awareness about human presence restrictions. Explore new technologies that could alert highway travelers to migration. comments? Okay, seeing none, let's go to the vote. And second recommendation, to continue work with Wyoming Department of Transportation to use dynamic messaging signage roadside during times of peak migration. Your vote's all
Ready to go.
All right, you're in the mood there. All right, let's go ahead and vote. Before we get into section 4, let's take a break at 10:15. Come back at 10:30, and we'll start with section 4 at that point in time. Give everybody a chance to. It looks like we're going to be well ahead of our agenda in our time schedule. So what I would like to do is continue working through our recommendations. At the point in time where we have finished our resolution on our recommendations, we'll go ahead and do public comment. So it may be much earlier than 3:30 that we do that. So we have sent a message out to those people who are online, letting them know if they want to comment. It's probably going to be earlier. For anyone who is here that would like to comment, good chance that it's going to be much earlier than 3:30. So we will move to that point. And once we have finished the recommendations, we'll do public comment. Okay.
Chairman?
Yep.
Just
Sure.
to note, I made a correction here. This is herd management units, not horse. So thanks, Maggie.
Oh. Thank you. Good proofreading again.
That's all Nat back there.
All right, we're on to section 4 on page 6. Recommendations related to highway projects, including wildlife crossing opportunities and other considerations. The local working group supports and applauds the state of Wyoming and other partners for their dedication to wildlife crossings and efforts to allow antelope to safely traverse roadways. These efforts, conserve wildlife and protect drivers on Wyoming roads from costly, emotionally impactful collisions. These efforts should continue and should be data-driven. Therefore, the local working group recommends continued support of Wyoming Game and Fish Department and Wyoming Department of Transportation coordinated efforts to evaluate priorities and pursue wildlife crossing funding. Coordinate corridor protection and opportunities with future road construction planning, and to continue to leverage partnership and funding opportunities. Questions or comments? All right, let's go ahead and vote. Good. Okay, next would be to continue use of wildlife crossing infrastructure during peak times, lay down sections of right-of-way fences, and use dynamic messaging road signs to alert travelers of wildlife crossing. Questions or comments? Jasmine didn't have her finger in the air, so we're very good. Let's go ahead and vote. Okay, and the third recommendation, to continue to support private fundraising efforts to support wildlife crossings and adjacent land habitat improvements. Questions or comments? Right, let's vote. Okay, section 5, recommendations on existing protections and designation. The local working group thoroughly discussed existing protections within the identified Sublette Antelope migration corridor and whether there are enough protections in place to address threats or if a designation is warranted. The group analyzed each segment, the connectivity throughout each, and the relationship among the segments, determining a piecemeal approach to the corridor would not preserve functionality. Throughout the length of the local working group process, public input has been taken, analyzed, and valued from all user groups. The working group has approached these conversations under the concept that conservation means development as much as it does protection. The local working group listened and discussed concerns from industry and others that the corridor has been functional with the current protections that exist with identification, current regulatory frameworks, and industry practices. The group also listened and discussed concerns from conservation, wildlife groups, and the public that designation is imperative to preserve the path of the pronghorn. The local working group recognizes and supports industry efforts to be partners in wildlife management, their contributions to research, and the voluntary actions that have become standard practice. The group also discussed the EO's direction with bottlenecks, high-use areas, stopovers, and recognizes that industry, Wyoming Game and Fish, and other state agencies must be coordinated and in good communication with each other during project development with or without a designation in place. The local working group has taken care to focus recommendations to address risk on landscape as identified in the biological risk and opportunity assessment that are actionable to that point. The local working group recommendations support economic development, respect private land and valid existing rights, and champion state-led management of antelope. The recommendations are meant to focus on preserving functionality of the corridor now and into the future, where more human-driven use of the landscape is expected. The local working group finds that existing protections are valuable and impactful, but not by themselves sufficient to ensure long-term functionality of the Sublette Antelope Migration Corridor for future generations. It is noted the local working group did not reach unanimous consensus on the recommendation to designate, with some members expressing concerns about overlapping protections and shortened time windows for projects to be conducted on the ground. Questions or comments on the text of section 5? Mark?
I do have a question about what's in quotes. Conservation means development as much as it does protection. I would just appreciate some of the background behind that. I think one look at that might cause confusion.
Sure. So if you all remember, and the commissioners didn't apply through the normal application process. They were appointed. But one of the questions that the governor asked on the application to join this working group was how if I can remember it right. What does this quote mean to you? And it's a Teddy Roosevelt quote. And everybody talked about how they understood that quote and that balance. And everybody here that went through that application process was very thoughtful in that balanced approach. And so we haven't talked about that directly in this working group, but that quote directly, but that concept is one that we have. And so I pulled that in for discussion today. So thanks for bringing it up to make sure that, if it fits with what you all want to bring forward. But that's working.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions, comments?
I appreciate the last part of this, but that we did unanimous consensus on the designation, and how you express the concerns with the lack of protections. Shortened time windows. I think there's a couple of projects that wouldn't have those pre-existing rights that would make their activity in the future limited and maybe even not economic for sale. So I appreciate the recognition.
I agree.
Other comments? All right. Therefore, the local working group recommends first recommendation, support the actions that come with the designation in the 8 corridor segments: the North, Bondurant, Foothills, east of Wyoming 191, Central, Southwest, Fontanelle, should be Fontanelle, and Calpet of the Sublette Antelope Migration Corridor, paired with a voluntary strategy for private lands, recognition of valid existing rights, continued grazing and agricultural use, and site-specific management focused on bottlenecks, stopover areas, high use, and future surface disturbance. Comments, questions? All right, there are no comments or questions.
We're, I'm sorry, maybe I have a question. Stopovers. We're still in the should category, not shall.
They overlap with high use.
Okay, so, but really like high use was getting at the shall. Bottlenecks were truly the shall and really the, so. Thinking,
Are you good?
okay, yeah.
All right. Any other comments or questions? There's a chance of things longer. All right, let's go. Go get here. Yes, Commissioner.
Would you be kind enough to give a full description of designation?
A full description of designation. Well, let's see. I can probably do that. Thank you.
I cannot do that, Mr. Chairman. So,
Okay.
um,
Here, that's okay.
so designation as outlined by the executive order means that should a corridor be designated, there are, what do I want to say? There are management considerations that apply to, bottlenecks, high use areas, and then encouraged, in stopover, or no, I'm sorry, in bottlenecks, high use, stopovers with high use, and then low and medium use areas with stopovers within. Those vary depending on, you know, what the management actions are in those specific areas. If it's, you know, a bottleneck area, there are, you know, different restrictions applied. If it's a high use area, different restrictions are applied. But what designation means is that it is a, you know, it does limit. So I'll just read to you. So with designation with bottlenecks, no surface disturbance or seasonal human presence shall be permitted within bottlenecks, and state agencies shall restrict uses to those that do not impair migration corridor functionality, except in cases necessary for human safety. In high use areas with a designation, surface disturbance and human presence shall be limited to levels that maintain corridor functionality and do not cause migrating mule deer or antelope to avoid or leave the high use portion of the designated corridor during migration periods. In stopovers within high use areas, within stopover areas with high use portions of the corridor, surface disturbance should be avoided. Permitted activities during migration periods should be limited or avoided. And in low and medium use areas and stopovers within, development and use can occur. Minimization, including project alterations, recreational permit restrictions, and other efforts that can be shown to reduce impacts to these areas should be considered where appropriate and will take into account whether an area is a low or medium use area. Surface disturbance, development, and human presence during migration should be limited. Within low and medium use areas, special consideration should be given to stopover areas to minimize disturbances. And then the rest of the executive order kind of details that more when it comes to valid existing rights, agriculture, research, state trust lands. I want to emphasize bottlenecks is probably the most restrictive management considerations. High use areas, it's another more restrictive with a shall. Stopovers within high use areas, it's a should be avoided. And medium use can, or medium and low use areas can occur. So the most restrictive bottlenecks in high use areas, right, Game and Fish?
So Commissioner, I'm gonna go back to what, when we originally talked about the difference between identification and designation. And this is what Sara has read was much more specific. This was just kind of a generalization that I had put together previously. But I'll just give you what I had put together on the differences between identification and designation. When a corridor is identified, it means the Wyoming Game and Fish Department has used GPS color data and biological analysis to determine that animals are consistently using a defined migration route. At this stage, a corridor is recognized scientifically. A biological risk assessment may be completed, but there are no additional regulatory processes which are triggered. Identification doesn't change how land is managed, it doesn't impose new requirements on private landowners, and it does not automatically affect permitting decisions. Designation is a step beyond identification. The designated corridor has gone through a full public and policy process, including a detailed biological risk and opportunity assessment, input from local government, industry, and stakeholders, review by the Game and Fish Commission, and recommendations from a local work study group. Then ultimately a decision from the governor. Once designated, the corridor becomes how the state evaluates future actions. That means state agencies are expected to consider the corridor when reviewing new projects. There's an emphasis on avoiding minimizing or mitigating impacts, and there's typically more coordination across agencies. Importantly, designation is still not a prohibition on development. It's a framework for better informed decision making. That's what we had talked about previously in our times. So,
Thank you for that. And then based on the county's inputs, specifically the commissioners for the impacted counties, they also have the latitude to grow or develop as they want.
There, Mr. Chairman, with the designation, if there is a, there would be some restrictions applied in bottlenecks and high use areas. And so counties would need to work with those restrictions if it's on, not federal land or private land. So state.
So then we get into
Well, no, I mean, federal, I'm sorry, I said that backwards. So federal land and state land, state land and would be subject to these. Federal land, state agencies would comment to that effect. Private land is not affected by the way that you can develop it under this effect.
Unless it's a voluntary by the county and its citizens.
Absolutely, yeah. Is that Game and Fish, you want to weigh in on this?
Yeah, I think you summed it up to fine. There's a required state permit. You have to abide by the designation. It's in a high use. Otherwise, it's pretty much voluntary, but what's the performance do what landowners doesn't impact life and all this and like raising there's stuff about raising. Want to emphasize that. What it really does is limited what actually state permit build you have to start get designation and your things are hanging for the
Mike, Fred, for some sort. Go ahead.
yeah, I just thought you have to have the state land and you have to have a state term required. That's one of those prohibitions become operative. If for some reason there's proposed use of state lands that does not require a state permit. I don't think the speaks to that. Am I correct in that? Yeah.
Mike,
Yeah, this is a question probably for Brandon or Jill, but going to I'm thinking of something that happened in Sublette County, the 40 rod, I can't remember what it's called, the subdivision there in 40 rod, that was a state permit that they triggered the developer to have to purchase permission.
It's sage grouse.
Yeah.
It's not the.
Yeah, well, I'm just thinking of executive orders, but that was a state permit that triggered that requirement.
Was it a small, was it a wastewater facility or?
It was going to be, and it actually never went to that, but we advised him on the application for state permit. For water district. Submission, he didn't decide to go through it, never got to.
So I just want to reference, it was in March. And Jill Randall gave us a nice presentation on this, and so maybe we could just, maybe we just walk. Jill, would you be willing to sort of walk through this a little bit with us quickly again?
Sure, this slide is showing a map. The specific parts of the corridor are colored differently, so the light gray that you see, that's the overall footprint of the corridor. And then the bottlenecks are in pink. High use is the purple portion, and then the stopovers that overlap are, sorry, high use is yellow, and the stopovers that overlap with the high use are purple on this map. So those are those areas we just talked about that have the higher level of protections that are afforded through the executive order. Just kind of pulling those areas out specifically, in reference to the scale of the rest of the corridor there. Those projects that are proposed within the entirety of the corridor do have some dialogue and discussion between Game and Fish and the project proponent, to try to come to a, win-win kind of solution for how to move forward.
So these are we'll just walk through this real quick too.
Sure. So this map here is showing those specific bottlenecks that are throughout the corridor. They're labeled and then, of course, shown up in that pink color there. Appendix B in the risk assessment does go into a lot more detail to discuss all of the different bottlenecks and the components that are more site specific that apply to those. But the largest and simplest way of, thinking about applying the executive orders that no surface occupancy and no permitted seasonal human use would be permitted on new proposals within bottlenecks. This is the table that was referred to earlier, where we do go through, look at all of those bottlenecks, and just kind of summarize in a real brief fashion the threats and the conservation actions that are associated with those and outlined in the risk assessment. High use, that's that purple area there that you see called out. Those are, you can see those in much more detail throughout the risk assessment. Surface disturbance and human use shall be limited to ensure functionality of the corridor and not cause migrating antelope to avoid or leave the area during migration season. That's that language pulled out of the EO and how we apply the executive order to those areas. And then the stopovers within high use. Similarly, surface disturbance should be avoided. Permitted human activities during migration should be limited or avoided. And that's kind of what it just. Or you want me to still run through this?
Right out. Does this help clarify? Okay.
Do you want to continue to go through some more of these slides here?
Good, good, then. Okay.
Okay.
We're fine, Bill. Thank
Thank
you.
you, Jill.
Absolutely.
Get our lights back up here. All right.
We need to make the general public aware that when it comes to private land, the county so it's
Well, not on private.
and private land, the county is crucial. But not in the state and federal, so needed to be sure that I live in the city.
Okay, so you're good with this.
Yes, Mr. Chair, thank you.
Other questions or comments then with respect to this recommendation?
The last statement has focused on bottlenecks, stopover areas, high use and future surface disturbance. And I guess with stopover areas being, should be, high use being, shall be, bottlenecks, being NSO. I guess, I don't know if stopover areas, we want to include that there. Like, I feel like the heightened focus is around the bottlenecks and the hoops.
Designation is going to dictate what's going to take place there, I think. Maybe,
I was just gonna say, you could say stopovers within high use areas if that's. I mean, it's less restrictive on stopovers within the more medium use areas, if that's where you're trying to make that focus point.
Yeah, I just think it was, kind of driving at this emphasis. So that's why it seemed to me like it, otherwise it wasn't, listing all of them, right? Like it didn't have medium use and low use in there, so maybe the stopover areas in high use, but I feel like maybe that's self-explanatory already by having high use listed.
High use.
I wouldn't have thought it was necessary, but other comments and questions on it? Would you like it better with stopover areas within? I use in future surface disturbance. Don't everybody fall asleep on me now. We're getting close.
I think we need to have high use and stopover areas within high use. Because if not, right now, it just looks like stopover areas within high use without including high use areas.
Okay. Get that, Sarah.
Jared, I'm fine with that, but it says focus, not limited to.
Other comments? Okay, we just had a chance to look at it. Let's go ahead and vote on this recommendation.
Okay, Jasmine's a 3, so we need to come back to this discussion. So
Do you want to do that now? You want to go back through it? You want to go through the, we got.
well, can everyone hold up their votes again, just real quick? Mike. Okay, thank you.
Would you prefer to go ahead and talk about this now, Jasmine? Would you like to, we can go through the next 2 recommendations and then come back? Talk about that. What is more effective? Sarah, what do you, Mark? Go ahead.
I'll let Jasmine go first.
Okay.
Oh, well, I think I'm just coming from still on that identification versus designation. So that's where my TV is coming from.
Oh, I see. Okay, got it.
I went back to the biological risk assessment and I might have a question for Game and Fish, trying to understand again. I was looking at the process to identify stopovers. And I need in my mind to get a better handle on the criticality of the stopover in relationship to low use, medium use, high use. Because it's just slightly confusing to me. Stopovers are typically calculated as the top 10% of the area of use. However, the Game and Fish chose to cut that in half. So thus, after careful examination of the location and size of stopovers using different cutoffs, a value of 5% was used. This reduced the area of the stopover polygon by half and provided a more realistic representation of what regional biologists observed for this herd. I wanted to get a sense of the interaction of a stopover in low, medium, and high, and kind of how critical each of those tiers are to the functionality of the corridor.
The calculation of the stopovers, as you outlined there, from our methods, it is done independent of what use level the corridor overlaps. So it's an independent analysis that's done separately. And then we just put all of the polygons on the same map and then determine, which use level of the corridor it overlaps with in order to determine if it's a stopover that overlaps with high or medium and low. So yes, we did reduce it from 10% to 5%. We felt like that was biologically representing kind of the reality a little bit better with we had some very large stopovers that just didn't seem like they were capturing the appropriate concept of what the stopover should be. And part of that we felt was due to the fact that this was pronghorn movement opposed to mule deer movement. That was a part of it. And I think we all felt pretty confident as far as managers that was a good way to land. It represented the biological reality that we experienced on the ground. But then, yeah, as far as how it overlaps with the different use levels, that's just a simple overlay on the map and it falls where it falls. I guess I don't know, Brandon, Sean, do you have anything else?
The way I think of it, that might make a little more sense, I know explain it, but it's good. 90%, in this case, 95% of what the animal is. Just it's a separate analysis. But just think of stopover as like, that's where they're spending 95% of their time during migration. It's an easier way, and it's I separate, you have migration segments, right? And then 95% of their time they're spending, in these stopover habitats. And why we went from 90% to 95% pronghorn, in one of the cases stood out to me was the Tracker's Point was being highlighted as the stopover area. If you ever watch pronghorn go over Tracker's Point, they ball it on one side and they just run. It's not stopover habitat. So they had to modify that from deer, pronghorn from deer. So that's why we had that little change. It's more conservative estimate of stopover.
Mark, does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think it does. This is grand bottlenecks over areas within our use areas. We're talking about support the actions in terms of designation of the corridor. I would probably end up being okay with this one. Yeah.
All right, so we've been through that. So under our process, basically, we had, I think, 2 people who were 2s. Was that correct? So 3 2s and 1 3.
3 2s and 1 3. So
I think I would switch to a 1. I'm comfortable that this comports with the EO, and again, looking at, it's not a shall, it's a should for stopovers within high use areas.
And I think based on our consensus model, the way we should move forward with this would be to show that this recommendation was approved, but there were 2 working group members who had reservations and 1 that had serious reservations with respect.
okay, so I think we should revote if the conversations changed people's number, so. Okay.
Okay, let's go ahead and revote then.
So wait, let me see. There are no other edits to this as it stands. Good, okay. I'll revote then. Okay, I got it.
All right, on to the next recommendation. Considerations around timing that can be adjusted on a case-by-case basis at the discretion of game and fish staff in response to conditions on the ground. That is not making sense to me.
I think this gets at, you have a bad winter and, you can maneuver in your seasonal restriction timeframe or something of that nature.
Timing determinations. By the, can be adjusted on a case to case basis with the.
Yeah.
Because we were specifically talking about initiation of application of it, depending on whether the trigger is still there, haven't gotten there yet, or already.
I think it just needs a little bit more clarification.
Yeah. Cause I think you could read it either way. Could you do a project based on ground conditions too versus winter conditions or whatever? If that's what you said.
Yeah, I was thinking, migration, if the animals are present or not. The equivalent of turnout dates. As opposed to this ground dry.
Okay, any other comments or questions on it? Okay, let's go ahead and vote.
So wait, do we need, is there an edit
Yeah,
that
well-
was being suggested?
I think I was reading it with the edit taken, with that being taken out,
The condition of on the ground or just the that?
just the that. I think that clarified from my perspective, what it was.
I think I had this recommendation and I just had it written as the days of peak timing use. I don't know if having that specificity in there would help make that a little clearer, because that's how it's laid out in the EO. Is by those dates of peak timing use determine, when the restrictions are in place. And that's what this is getting at.
Everybody else.
I think for us, the only obstacle that we run into sometimes is just timing of the timing. So if you're gonna make those adjustments because of what's happening in the environment, for a proponent with a physical industrial project, they want to have timeframes built in, right? And a lot of times they're planning projects a year in advance, but understanding that this you don't know what it looks like yet, right? And so having windows of adjustment, and this is just very open-ended. So as long as they have, kind of ample notice, it's okay. But we're dealing with it anyway all the time.
And based off what the game official said, it's not likely that would happen, like that the timing would need to be changed. I just think it's good to give them the authority to be able to do that in the case that it is.
Yeah, and they do already.
Yeah, it just sort of reinforces that.
I think this suffices then. Are you okay with it? This?
Yeah, no, I'm fine.
Great. Okay, let's go ahead and vote on this one. All right. And the last recommendation we've got, but we've got one we got to go back to. Consider establishing a moratorium, a memorandum of understanding. Moratorium, that's what we want to do. Consider establishing a memorandum of understanding between the Wyoming Game and Fish Department, Bureau of Land Management, Wyoming, and Regional U.S. Forest Service to consolidate resources and coordinate efforts within the antelope migration corridor. Include considerations for counties and other land management localities. This MOU can include, but is not limited to, asserting state-led management of wildlife and existing plants, directing resources for habitat, rangeland, and water improvement, fencing modifications, reaffirming valid existing rights, reinforcing the right and ability to graze livestock on federal and state lands, and addressing other conservation concerns within the corridor.
So I've lived with the consequences of being a lawyer my entire professional career.
I'm sorry. Oh.
And thank you. And should be could. This MOU could include.
That's the only edit you got, Mike. Yeah.
I'm holding myself back, believe it or not.
All right, that's all Mike's got. Any other questions or comments on this? All right, let's vote. All right, we need to go back to page 5. And look at the third bullet point. See what we can come up with for that. I'm open to suggestions.
I would think that we could do a break here. Yeah. And then consider this separately. But that's a suggestion.
How about and vice versa? So like designation on projects and projects on designation.
I agree with that.
It's the cause and effect of like both sides of that.
Designation, I think there's a concern that it's going to impact projects. Whether it forces them into a seasonal that raises costs or something like that, right? Or makes access harder, but.
Or they don't do the
But
project.
again, I kind of distinguish between. The antelope as something that belongs to. You know, the state, the citizens of the state that's managed by Game and Fish, and then the economic impacts that come from. Trying to maintain the integrity of the antelope population. And we want to understand both, but whose role is it to understand? It's Game and Fish's role to understand the impacts on the wildlife, but it's somebody else's responsibility to understand the impacts on the economic vitality of that region, whether it's a county or whatever, and it's the balance that has to be achieved. And so they have to interact, but it's a different response, it's a different agency that's responsible for those two separate efforts.
And again, going back, I think the initial intent was to create a dialogue back and forth so that there was communication. And somehow, I still think we've lost that. I don't know, maybe.
What if we brought something into the, like, the 5-year review about this so that it's setting up like a timeline? So it's not like just sort of out there like, okay, you guys should be talking about this. But it gives it more of like, you should be ready to present information on this for every 5-year cycle.
Yeah, or maybe it's that 5-year review that's done that is shared with county commissioners and conservation districts. That would be. Yeah.
We had a conversation during our break about the use of the phrase projects. And I think in how we are talking right now, we're talking about an industrial user or something that causes surface disturbance or that type of impact, but people use the word projects for all kinds of things. So that could be a conservation project, a mitigation project. However, so if we need a definition for what project means when we're using it, or we have to. Yeah. But I don't know if all the way through our whole document, we mean just what I said, the physical industrial type project.
We ought to just have one definition out
Yeah.
there. Mike.
Mr. Chair, Game and Fish can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe a project is any action on the ground. So even though it's let's call it a habitat project for antelope or even deer, but it's in the antelope corridor, it still would fall under the stipulations for timing.
It's a good point.
Is that correct? In a federal planning process.
Requires a state.
Or you would, in a federal planning process, you would also comment on that. To those states.
Yeah, we make the recommendation.
So it could be any, I mean,
So do we feel good, like that a project still in this context is, it could be anything?
that's how I look at it, but I've dealt with it with other projects.
I think
Yeah.
in this, it would be
It
because
really
it's,
doesn't matter, yeah, if it's a playground or if it's a shopping mall, whatever.
Feds don't care here.
Okay,
we're good.
so we're happy with that?
Well, maybe back to, I mean, Maggie's. I don't know if we've kind of talked about that timeline or added, you know, going back to that recommendation about the 5-year review and.
Yes.
If there's a desire to call out communication and presumptively information regarding effects on employment and county valuation concerns. Seems to me that that might be most relevant, because we're not asking Game and Fish to do it. I think we might be asking Game and Fish to obtain it, or be sure that it's in the communication includes that. If you went back to the 5-year study, we could simply say that as part of compiling the assessment, Game and Fish will seek input from affected county boards, county commissions, never regarding actual or potential effects on employment and county valuation concerns. I mean, I would think it would fit there. The 5-year cycle seems to me to probably be about, might be right in terms of getting a fair evaluation of the significance or lack of significance of designation on those, on the balance of the activities counties are concerned about. So I'd suggest just adding it there as an information, seeking information regarding employment and county valuation into the 5-year report. And then deleting it here.
I think I wanna go back to the executive order. And this is in appendix B, number 8, where it talks about this review. And so with Maggie's recommendation about the 5-year review, the executive order is explicit in that every 5 years that there needs to be a review. It just says 5 years. So I'm gonna read this to you. In consultation with affected county commissioners and tribes, an area working group of similar membership to that outlined above, which is our local working group, will be convened within 5 years of designation of a corridor. So every 5 years, the executive order said, or the first 5 years after the corridor is designated, a group similar to us would reconvene and evaluate the corridor again. Is the mapping still accurate? Is the behavior? What's happened in the last 5 years? And so as part of that, a future use will be here. Future county commissioners, future, industrial users will be here. So I imagine when Game and Fish, as we've asked them to do in this, should the corridor be designated, they come with a 5-year review from their, statutory space. And then the county commissioners from these counties would probably be the ones to bring information about what they've seen in their counties with designation and bring those economic impact numbers or concerns to this working group in 5 years. Maggie's recommendation says that should happen every 5 years. We shouldn't just do it 5 years after. It should happen 5 years and 5 years to continue that evaluation of the effectiveness and make those adjustments or changes within the corridor every 5 years. So maybe this is implied in the process that's already outlined in the executive.
I mean, I'm fine with that. I'm totally fine with that, in which case we can simply delete the section. Yeah, right.
Yeah, I think it is redundant when you go back and look at section 8. Of appendix B. Or item number 8. So yeah, I think we can delete these and Maggie's recommendation will actually cover them.
Maintain this section.
What do you think? I think it's still, there's still redundancy with this bullet point also.
The only reason, I mean, the reason it's in here is because that was a strong opinion in the last meeting. There needed to be regular communication, and that discussion included communication between the governor's office and the Wyoming County Commissioners. If folks, and I'm speaking to the county commissioners here, if folks think that their role is adequate and respected about that, I'm fine with it. That's why I think this recommendation was put in there in the first place. To make sure the county's felt the opportunity. Had that opportunity. I don't know how many shrink and violent boards and county commissioners we got. Do we encourage maybe all, maybe none, but that's why it's here. I personally, I would defer to the county commissioner. What do you think?
I'm okay with that.
What about this change where it's not, there's no onus on one entity to lead this, but we encourage regular communication between the Wyoming Game and Fish Department, county commissions and conservation districts to evaluate effects of designation on projects that have been completed and potential effects on proposed projects.
All right, got a problem with that.
we can sort of, I think it's good. Everybody okay with that?
Mark?
Yeah. All right, you did good, Sarah. Let's go ahead and vote on this recommendation then.
All right.
All right, with that, if I'm not mistaken, we have been through the entire draft.
Great.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Dave.
could I go back and do the one thing?
No.
Okay,
Yes, you may.
okay, page 6, your second bullet point that you got down through here. It's something that bothers, yeah, continued use of wildlife crossing infrastructure, peak hour, lay down sections of right of way fence, use dynamic messaging, road signs, and enforcement. Well, a lot of these times we put these things up and do, but nobody really goes in and enforces them. By enforcement, we can have reduced speed limits, we can have all sorts of things that will go going along with it there. But there ought to be buy-in by people enforcing roads and stuff out on the roads.
What does everybody think?
No, I mean, introducing the concept that why not? Consider speed limit alterations to protect. If that concept isn't in here, it's a good. Whether you want to do it or not, I don't know.
Come on, speak up, Mike.
Lay down sections of our offensive, use dynamic messaging road signs, consider speed limit alterations to during peak times migration. I think that's what you're suggesting.
Yeah, I'm just saying that by putting in enforcement that's going in through there, there's a lot of different things that can come into
Yeah,
enforcement.
sure.
That's come out. If we're gonna be doing this things and laying down, it's one thing, if you're gonna lay down a section of fence and you're gonna let stuff go around, there ought to be somebody warning the public. Not only with signs, but reduce, that goes on with it too.
What is that term that YDOT uses for the speed limit adjustment?
Superintendent speed limit.
Variable speed
Yeah.
limits?
I think it's a good suggestion, but as I think about it, I know everybody driving pickup would be excited about it. Happy excited.
It's a good idea. I think we may want to distinguish between county roads and state highways. Teton County is in fairly regular arm wrestling matches with YDOT over speeds, both for human and wildlife safety and wildlife vehicle collisions. YDOT needs to do speed studies and this, that, and the other to justify. And then there has to be the enforcement mechanism. Our sheriff has said that the YDOT presence in Teton County is diminuted right now. The YDOT rank is just really thin. So it lands on our sheriff deputies to largely enforce something, and drivers who are used to driving 55 or 45 and then see 35 for a period of time don't really drive 35. The road is designed for 55. This, that, and the other. It's a great idea. I don't know how effective it's been for us.
The highway patrolmen in southwestern Wyoming are all on I-80, they're not in anything else.
Yeah, so just speaking to the practicality of this, I think, to focus on everything we can do that would have the best, most impact might be, just help the fundamental integrity and legitimacy of designation. Mike Cameron.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, they tried a nighttime speed limit, maybe Game and Fish knows the reason why it reverted, but we had a nighttime speed limit basically south of Pinedale to East Fork Hill. Poof, it went away. And it was specifically for wildlife collisions. But it didn't last that long. And then all of a sudden it was back to 65, 24 hours a day.
Didn't we have something, it could be the same one that was actually a test that ran for 3 or 4 years? And then it reverted back to 65.
I thought it was moose. I thought there was
Just as
a
many.
lot of moose stripes. And then, I remember during hockey season, a lot of like drop off kids during the, earlier time frame, it hit dark and then you're changing your speed limit. But I thought it was because of moose.
Well, it's moose and deer, because we had a number of deer fatalities. We call them.
Yeah. We gave a fish.
Deer, moose, and elk are a lot of them get hit. And basically, we didn't do that under the speed limit for a period of 5 years. I thought it was that. My dog and Green Engineers, TNC, the analysis and didn't change motor speed. So that's why we're currently trying to get it to the top of the list for a crossing project, like 5 months. It's just not ranking statewide anymore. Vehicle strikes and motor speed were not affected, according to my recollection.
Grand Teton National Park has a nighttime speed limit, drops it from 55 to 45. It's been there a long time. People recognize it, but I don't know if the statistics bear out how effective it's been.
To the airport, right?
Yeah, it all is for 390 for the 22, 390 intersections.
Commissioner Bernard has the floor. He's got a question for you.
We had the conversation last meeting and again this meeting when we put up the large road signs. Does that have any positive impact on wildlife?
I don't know if we have any good data on that.
Because that's part of the recommendation that we've been working on.
We certainly have those throughout the state. Most of the agreements, when we did most of those road signs are through some type of grant agreement, part of the main agreement before and after it is effective or not.
And so I know a lot of people are collecting that data to talk with White Dot partners. Anytime we need these types of actions, they would do that. That should have been. We're gonna drive, they want to drive, it's nice.
All right, we're not getting very far here.
The area that we don't have a lot of definitive data and science to direct us, there's a lot of people that think things are happening, but it's, in general, it's just an area we don't have a lot of data and science.
Do we want to add another bullet point as we've got here for appropriate use variable speed limits during peak migration?
Or maybe that's to say where appropriate, encourage implementing variable speeds.
Go ahead, Mike.
If we're gonna encourage it to yell at, to yell at BLM about wild horses, we might as well yell at that to consider the concept. It is human behavior, not animal behavior. I know that there is a limitation at dusk on 390 in Wyoming, and that kept you from getting the Great Prairie Howlers. So there's one strategy.
If we do, I'm not against it. Again, there are practical limitations. If we do, we should get data and do some studies, and so we should encourage that as well along with this. Anecdotally, you can have all kinds of discussions. This past winter, we had more moose strikes on 390 north of where the wildlife crossings are, but the wildlife crossings that are brand new are being well utilized. We have cameras on them, and there have not been the moose fatalities there that we used to have. So again, the best thing is to actually put the fences and the crossing in. Whether this variable speed limits works is
Other comments? Okay, so we have already approved the recommendation above on bullet point number 2 as it is right now, or are we?
Yeah, this is an addition.
So this is in addition. So let's go ahead and let's just put it to a vote as to whether we want to do this as it's written. Okay, looks like it was a good addition. Okay, with that, I think we have finished the recommendations draft. Are there any other recommendations that the working group members have come up with since our last meeting that you would like to add, that you think would be beneficial, or something that would help supplement our recommendations to the government?
I think the first part of this on page 7, there's 5 under section 5, page 7, the last paragraph before we get to the bullets, some of the concerns that we have are also the reclamation areas that are landing inside high use. So it's like you're trying to protect high use, but the activity that's happening there is helping them the area. A way of looking at that. So maybe adding in somewhere in this the concern around the reclamation activity. We don't want to we don't want to send the wrong message with how reclamation works. And to give you maybe a flip side or a different thing, there are other species that insects that were showing up on the Endangered Species Act and managing habitat. Some of this back to protecting your violet. And in your reclamation, it would be a good idea to grow that violet. But then are you asking for your construction site or what have you them to be have a higher concern because you just grew a species that attracts an endangered species? We don't want to encourage that. We want to encourage that real reclamation is happening in a good way. We want to encourage the growth of the violet, regardless of the species that comes to it. So I guess I have concern about protecting high use over reclamation plans And that's really hard to drive that, but maybe just adding some of the concern around that last paragraph, having something in it around recognition of my use.
Would you be willing to come up with?
Yeah, I'll think, maybe I can
Suggestion
think about that over a little lunchtime or something.
Yeah.
Like the search decisions that has to happen in order to make, like, to do the reclamation? Like the restrictions of the time and, you know, how cell oversize, how it's different for those, or like what is exactly your concern?
Yes, so some of the reclamation that we can see has this designation of high use over top of it. And for an example, down south, there's an old oil and gas field. Joe talked to it a little bit in the Oil and Gas Commission presentation. Those pods have been reclaimed for a long time. And so maybe don't know if they were traveling there all along or if they're attracted to the reclamation work that has happened over that time. And that asset is viable for reconsideration of purchase or new development. It won't have pre-existing rights. They'd have to adhere to all of these things. And if you layered all of their stipulations together, it makes them an uneconomical asset. With sage grouse and counting with antelope. So that gets down to like a whole lot of pieces.
We're trying to identify reclamation as a concern.
Yeah.
How about if we were to just add after ground along with reclamation concerns? That would be something that you're concerned with. You are, you know, it's one of the people who is not voting, that you don't have any.
Consequences for regulation activities.
Yeah.
And consequences for reclamation activities with capture. I think Jasmine was just discussing how certainly. I think that'd be appropriate. And the other aspect of this is the objective of this is not to promote single species management. It's a holistic, to be included within a more holistic approach to the landscape.
Jasmine, does that address your concerns if we were to add that at the end?
Maybe, yeah. I think I just wanted in there somewhere.
Could we add positive consequences? Because that sort of sounds like a negative if you just read it.
Potential consequences make it either way.
Well, what Jasmine's saying is like, you have an industrial concern there. You use that space and then you reclaimed it. And then, so you claim it very productively and it's got a lot of good sagebrush and all, you know. And it is in the, I think you said high use, right? And so then if Jasmine wants to come back because they know that this was a good development site, right? And they know that there are still maybe assets of it, I don't know.
Yeah.
Then it would, because there's not a valid existing right there anymore, because you reclaimed it. Now you've reclaimed it so well that the antelope were drawn to there, maybe, because the high quality habitat and maybe the surrounding habitat is, I don't know, not as good or something. And so Jasmine's question is that the antelope's natural pathway, or did we make them come here because of the habitat improvement? And that would be a challenge then to redevelop that space without developing existing. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Good job. You said it better than I did.
Well, no, I just put it in simpler terms, maybe.
But what we're trying to identify in this section is the reason why there was not unanimity.
Yeah.
So I think we can get off.
And that would be one of mine, right? So like I can, the operator that I work for on the line has like 89% of their pads are in some sort of state of interim reclamation, and a lot of it's more than 10 years old. And high use looks like fingers coming across some of the top of the mesa, like they're attracted to it, is one of the perspectives I would have. And I think that that's a good thing. Like that says that we're doing the right job with our reclamation. And I do have a concern for other operators that wouldn't have those pre-existing rights to keep developing their activity in a reasonable way and to encourage them to keep doing the reclamation that they're doing. Even though they're gonna have to work in this new space. Sorry. That was
It's okay, I
very-
got you. I'm just trying to get to a point where we can get this,
One little statement,
you
yeah.
know, that will satisfy what your point is.
I think Sarah said it well. Or simplify it, but how do we?
Word that it would like de-incentivize like future reclamation projects to be done to the best of their ability.
That's part of it, yeah. And the other part of it is that they wouldn't necessarily be able to go back and use the asset that they were already developing.
Are you saying there should be an exemption for reclaimed lands that end up in a high use?
I don't know.
If we're talking about that, we're talking about something that would be outside of this section.
Okay.
Okay, this section is actually talking about the existing protections. It's talking about the reason that we did not have unanimous consent for designation. If you want to go back and add something like that, we can do that in another area, but I don't think this is the place to do that. Mike?
A lot of more concern, potential consequences for reclamation activities would include that potential disincentives for reclamation activities. Could include that in any simple language. I mean, because that's what I've heard you voicing concern was it might disincentivize folks to do as good a job reclamation as they could. We don't.
Right.
So if that captured it for here, that'd be an easy fix. But it's your.
Not my thought. I think the other problem that I'm driving into is that you could be precluding an operator from returning to their activity because of their reclamation, just because they don't have pre-existing rights. The pre-existing rights is the only thing that sort of protects them in that space. And so older assets, or if they didn't have recent NEPA, which, you know, gets to the plan, it makes them unmarketable.
So what if it was,
Or not marketable.
I'm writing as I'm saying this, and concerns for the ability to access prior assets due to reclamation concerns.
Maybe. Yeah, I mean, it's getting closer. And we can maybe wordsmith it a little bit. Yeah, you still need the other part of that, the disincentivizing holistic reclamation practices or something of that nature.
Someone give me some.
We've done pretty good. This was what I was afraid we were going to run into in a lot of areas.
No, yeah.
It's been pretty minimal,
yeah.
so. We just want to make sure we get it right.
Concerns related to accessing reclaimed prior assets that have been reclaimed. Yeah, otherwise we gotta get into a lot of detail.
Yeah.
As well as. Just gotta wait for the spell check there.
It doesn't even have a suggestion. This. In. I got it. Quality.
It just could discourage future reclamation efforts.
Okay, would it just be concerns related to encouraging reclamation?
Yeah. Yeah, so I used my little AI here for a second to simplify, and I've got a couple options that could discourage future reclamation efforts, may create a disincentivize for future reclamation activities, could reduce incentives for timely and effective reclamation. I don't like that one. I like the first one. May adversely affect the implementation of future reclamation practices. That's a pretty good one.
Okay.
May adversely affect the implementations.
Where do you want it, or what does it start?
Okay, and may adversely affect the implementation of future reclamation practices.
Yeah.
Okay.
We want you to be okay. Okay, so rest of the working group, are we okay with this change? Should we vote to make this change, make it official, I guess? Let's go ahead and vote that we'll make this change.
I'm just glad we avoided using disincentives.
Yeah. Me too. I don't want to write that anymore. All right, Mr. Chairman, that is all.
I think that concludes our recommendations. I think now I had said that we would move to public comment. Sarah, you wanted to talk about next steps. Would you rather do the next steps prior to the public comment, or would you rather wait?
Well, I kind of already talked about them this morning, so unless anyone has additional questions about what I'll do is, I'll just talk about it now since I'm talking. I'll take these recommendations, I'll put them, I'll address the changes we made, make sure those are all cleaned up. I'll put them in our full report and I'll share that with the local working group members. I want everyone to read that report and I'll give you a deadline on any last little changes. Nothing substantive, but you see a word out or something you just want to clarify. Will let me know on that. I'll make those changes and then when we have the final presented to the governor for his review and decision. Sound good? Or any questions?
Questions, comments? All right, we will go ahead then and open for public comment. I have not seen the list.
Oh, you know, I don't have a list.
Oh.
So, if you are in the room and want to do public comment, raise your hand.
go ahead and come forward. If you come to the podium, please give your name.
I don't know if any of the work Joy offered. I just wanted to, one thing that crossed my mind is that I hope there's something more, maybe more of a local group, like Sublette County is, involved before 5 years. Because some of us may not be around then. Also, I wanted to know what the time frame for public comment would be, when these changes will be available to the public to view. And
This is your opportunity now.
Okay.
This truly reflects the near final. Yeah, but we'll make the final report available.
thank you.
Everyone, Megan Riley from the Wyoming Outdoor Council. I really just wanted to echo what was said at the very beginning of the meeting. Just thank you. Congratulations on all of your hard work. I hope you feel good about all the progress you've made and you're almost at the finish line. And I know it doesn't feel like it, like working through your Google Docs in real time, but this actually is a historic moment. Like, this is the first time that the state has ever gone through the full designation process under this executive order, and it's the very first time the state has ever tried to do this for pronghorn. So I hope you can all pat yourselves on the back and feel good about tackling this. And yeah, just really grateful for all of the hard work you've put in. Thank you.
Thank you for coming to all meetings.
Bill Ames, resident of Sublette County and Sweetwater County. Wow. What an accomplishment. Sarah, you in the governor's office obviously put together a great team. And each individual here, I mean, Rob, chairman, fantastic. What an achievement. I mean, it's just unreal that this collaboration of people put together a document that is so critical. And I think development, I think our economy isn't going to be hurt by this, but yet we're protecting the iconic species of Wyoming. Thank you, each and every one of you. Just phenomenal job. Was it perfect? Probably not. But man, this is, I had no expectation that this would come out this way, this fast, with a very diverse group. Thank you. Just thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you, Bill. Any other public comments? Anyone online for public comments? All right, no further public comments. We are going to be done before noon. That is a momentous occasion here. Well, that leaves me to conclude, and I would just like to thank so many people, but first of all, Wyoming Game and Fish for all of the work that you've done on this, the biological risk assessment, providing the scientific background that we used to do this. I didn't expect that we would have this group or any group look at something like that and see it as favorably as what we did initially. I think that says a lot about what Game and Fish has done and that biological risk assessment. I want to thank Sublette and Sweetwater counties for allowing us to use venues for our working group. That was very nice to have the venues that we had. They worked out super. I want to thank all of the partners that came in and helped us to make this decision. The federal partners that we had, the state partners that came in, our local groups that came in, all of the NGOs and conservation groups that gave their opinions to us and gave the factual information from those entities such as the state and the federal government. Thank you to Governor Gordon for taking on an executive order to look at migration corridors to protect these species. I think it says an awful lot that he was willing to take that on. I appreciate having the opportunity to serve on a group such as this. Really surprised that a group with this many varied interests and this many different stakeholders could look at the material that we were given and have the respect that was given here amongst this group throughout the course of our 5 meetings. It is remarkable for me to see how much this group came together, respected one another, and worked together to come up with this process. I think this is a momentous occasion. This is the first time this has been done. I don't think that any of us had any idea when we first decided that we would take on this task, that it was going to be what it was. I think we've all learned an awful lot about antelope that we would have never believed we were going to learn. But I think it's been a very good exercise. I think that we're going to present a good product to the governor. I'm very pleased to do that. And just want to say how much I appreciate being able to work with this group. It was really an honor and a privilege to meet the people we had and to see people come together as much as they did to come up with the type of document that we're going to provide. So once again, thank you. That's all I've got. I would like to get a picture of everybody when we're done. I think that would be a good thing. And other than that, we're adjourned. So thank you much, everybody. Thank you very much.
Chairman Slaughter, just real quick, I really missed the thing.
Oh, please, yeah.
Oh,
Thank you. You guys were amazing. You took a hard, wicked problem and you worked through it. And I just can't thank you again enough on behalf of everybody here that works to make sure we greatly appreciate all your efforts. The results of upcoming, this is a monumental moment in time and it formed my heart. This is the kind of things I wake up for and do.
And I was very remiss. Thank you very much to Sara.
Yeah.
She is the one. Get everything out there available for information for our purposes, and she was an officer. So I apologize for not bringing that.
No, that's fine.
I had to use my notes and then walk right off and missed what was probably the most important asset that we had. So
Yeah.
thank you so much.
What are we doing the pictures from the screen?
I don't know. We're